What is the Manchester Podcast Festival then?
Oh, so let me explain that.
I got confused.
Yeah,
and that's in November as well.
Yeah. So we have seemed. So basically, what happened last October? All of a sudden, I was about to go to Germany to watch the football, and I was like, "Hey, what's this? The Manchester Podcast? Why's nobody fucking asking me about it?"
Was this after you thought of Pods Up North?
No.
Oh, okay, right.
So
right.
now I could tell this story, but I'll do it now.
We're already rolling, so
yeah. Well, just so we can come back into it and do it again, but you'll understand why. So we were like, "Who's doing this?" So we looked out, and it was like all the podcasts that were coming were not from the north, from Manchester at all. They're all from London, and we're like, "So what are they? I don't get it." You know, it's not like and all the people I know in podcasts in Manchester, they weren't involved either. And I was like, "Do you know anything about this?" "No." "Do you know anything?" "No, I don't." Anyway, it turns out, funnily enough, the people that organise it are the same people that organise Kendall Calling. And so they've organised it very like they would organise a festival or a thing. And so, but the problem that they've had, I think, is that they're realising that although, you know, people will pay and come and see a podcast live in the same way that people will go and see a band live, like podcasters themselves operate very differently to bands, and so they're just trying to.
I always find live podcasts have got to have their own audience. You like you build up your audience, and then you do a live podcast.
Yeah,
it's not like you just do a live podcast and hope people show up.
So what happened was we'd been talking about maybe doing something alongside, and I assumed it would be something that would maybe run for a week, and they'd be doing live shows in different places. And so I was like, well, let's do something with it. And maybe, all right, bring up these, like Richard Herring's.
Yeah, of course.
He's coming up. Brilliant. Bring that up, put that on. But maybe give one of the local podcasts the chance to warm up for them.
Yeah, just like festivals do.
Exactly. So even if it's like 2 hours before he goes on, you're still in the same room. You still act as the warm up. And they were a little bit like, don't know who you are. You're trying to steal our thunder, steal our money. And we're like, no. We just want to celebrate. Anyway, they were so about it. And then we just decided to put something on and go, rather than waiting for permission with them because they're messing about, and we just went for it. But
yours is very... Anyway, Ant McGinley, thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Before we get too far in.
I do think as well, that's how you should start a podcast. Just dive straight in. My friend is a...
Yeah, I always do the intro, explain a few things myself before, so that we can just start.
Oh, no. I think you should keep this bit in now. Just jump in here.
Yeah, that's what I always do.
And then do the intro.
Yeah, well, I kind of do that. But, like a double intro, where,
double intro.
Where people introduce the guest.
Let's go triple intro.
But, where people introduce the guest to tell you what they're about, and then the start of the conversation is that exact same thing.
Yeah.
So whereas they didn't need to do that.
What I'll just do is I'll say something really cool now, then you clip it and you put it at the beginning.
Yeah, we could do
for
that.
Example, like I just think, I think podcasting could actually save humanity.
Wow.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. Soundbite at the beginning of the teaser.
And instantly that people go, he's a knob. Or they go, how's that going to happen?
Subscribe.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, or delete.
I'll try that. Yeah. I'll do that for this one. I'll just put it at the beginning and see what happens. Market research.
And just leave it. You go, that little quote there. And this is how I mean, obviously, Tech, you're in charge here. But what I would do is, I would start the podcast, have a 2-second silence, so there's a gap between whatever's there. Then that's that quote, and then another pause to let it breathe, and then hit the music.
Boom! I'll try that. That sounds good. That sounds good. So anyway, Pods Up North.
Hello.
So what is Pods Up North?
Pods Up North is a one-day event taking place on the 23rd of November, 2019. If you're listening to this in the future, so you missed it. It was fucking amazing. So we're at the time we're recording this, we're about 5 weeks away from doing it. Basically, I've been going to America for the last 3 years to conferences and festivals about podcasting. I've been going to London to all these events, and yet these are great events. They bring people together. There's so much energy. There's so much to learn. There's so much to share. But then there's a lot of people that get neglected. And obviously, like, getting to America is expensive to be over there and do that. Getting to London is expensive, right? To be honest, even if you live outside of London, just like at Watford Gap, getting to London's expensive. And so I was like, well, why don't we just do something somewhere else and actually shine a spotlight? So the idea is it's a one-day event, and we're going to shine a spotlight on great podcasts and podcasting talent outside of London. That's it. So it's not anti-London.
It's just alternative.
Exactly. And it's just to say there's great stuff. And we are doing it in Manchester now. I'm very aware that a lot of people go, Manchester's not north. Obviously.
Yeah, but it's more central.
Yeah,
it's easy to
is,
get to.
It is. So
I get that.
So it's a bit closer, and it's in a good position for people to come to in terms of transport links and things as well. So whether you're coming from Scotland, Newcastle, even Wales, it's fairly easy to get to. We're literally just doing it as one event to begin with. Our long-term aim is to do it every year. And potentially to do an orbital event as well. So
orbital. What does that mean?
Orbital, like they played at Kendall Calling this year, didn't they?
Right,
no. So we would do. So in November we would do it to coincide with the Manchester Podcast Festival.
Right. Yeah.
Because podcasting could literally save humanity.
There's that quote again.
We do that in November, and then maybe in May, so sort of 6 months around the thing, we would have a smaller event or a similar event in Leeds or
I see.
Or
so like
Newcastle,
like tour it around sort of thing.
So you kind of do maybe just like an evening event rather than an all-day event.
Right, I get
Yes.
you. I get you. Yeah, that sounds interesting.
And in a moment, there's going to become a really sort of awkward point we've got to figure out, and this is going to be difficult for you, Tech, and also for you to work out, because we have agreed a sponsor for the event. But we're embargoed, so at the minute I'm not allowed to say who it is. Although, because this podcast is being pre-recorded, I could say who it is now, and then it goes out. However, I might jinx it. So if I say who it is, and then for whatever reason, like the fax falls down the back of the table and it doesn't go through in time, we'll have no sponsor. Right. So then that messes up the episode. So if you're hearing this version of it now, that means I fucked up somewhere, and now we don't have the sponsor. So we're going to be announcing our sponsors over the next few weeks. I'm very excited to say that as long as I don't fuck anything up between now and then, and this is not entirely down to me, I'm working with two amazing people, Kate Cocker and Vic Turnbull.
That's what I was going to ask you.
The three of us have kind of spearheaded this. And when we were in America in the summer, myself and Vic went out there because we're footloose and fancy free. Kate's got kids and husband and a dog. She got a dog? No, Kate hasn't. Vic's got a cat. That's not important. Although the cat's name is Alan, just in case you're wondering.
Love it.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's anybody who has like a pet with a human name is all right in my book. Yeah. Right. Although it
next dog I'm thinking of calling it Dave.
Yeah. But can you imagine? It's like just be really weird. Like you just see the old lady coming out at night, just going, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave.
Do you watch Gogglebox?
I do.
The Manchester family. One of their dogs is called Dave.
The Germans that live in Manchester.
The Rottweiler one. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They've got a couple. One of them's called Dave.
That's brilliant. Dave.
Anyway.
And Dave from Gogglebox is going to sponsor the.
Yeah, you
go. So I'm very excited. And I'm just thinking now because we're doing this at the beginning of the show, and if this doesn't happen, you'll have to cut this bit out.
That's fine.
And make the rest of it really flat.
We'll work out magic. It's okay.
Our headline sponsor for the event is Spotify.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
How on earth have you managed that?
It's first of all, it's down to Vic, I think.
That is amazing.
So we met them when we were out in America. So I was speaking at Podcast Movement.
I was going to say Podcast Movement, which is arguably the world's biggest podcast event. Would you say?
I just happen to be wearing a
That's
Podcast
brilliant.
Movement t-shirt here.
I like it a lot.
There we go.
I like it a lot.
I'm not sure what underwear I've got on if you mention any other events later, but we'll see. So I've been to Podcast Movement 3 years in a row. The first time I went out, it was just like do I want to, if I'm really going to make a go of this, I should go. And I looked at it, and it's expensive to get to America, obviously.
How much is a ticket for Podcast Movement?
It depends when you get it. So if you get it early doors, it's like can be $250. I bought it at the last minute. It would cost more than that. Yeah, and then I paid the upgrade as well to get the virtual ticket, so I could watch all the other sessions afterwards.
Right. Yeah.
It takes place over, really the main event's like 2.5 days, but then they have a warm up day.
It's like midweek, isn't it?
Yeah, so it starts on the Tuesday and it runs till the Friday afternoon
in Orlando.
So it was Orlando this year, Philadelphia the year before,
yeah.
Anaheim the year before that.
Right.
So I've spent the last 3 years going to those, and the last 2 years I've been a speaker at Podcast Movement.
That must be pretty
It's
cool.
been very exciting. That has been very cool, and it's gone very, very well. So when we were out there, I was doing my speaking thing, I was doing my networking thing, as was Vic. I really wanted Vic to be out there to see what the event was like, to give us an idea of what we could achieve one day. Podcast Movement has been running for 6 years now. next year will be its 7th
Is
year
that all it is?
in
Wow.
Dallas, I think it's going to be.
Dallas, yeah.
And that started as a Kickstarter. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
I
it
did hear
started as
that,
a Kickstarter. Jared and Dan and a couple of other guys. put
Jared
that together.
Easley.
Jared Easley, yeah, who is famous more, probably as much for his dad jokes as he is for, If you've not joined the podcast movement community, I think it's the biggest podcast community on
It
Facebook.
must be. I'm in a few, and that's the biggest by far.
26,000.
Yeah.
And actually, Jared's been very, very good because I spoke to Jared. I know they've looked at maybe doing some meetups and things over here, and I reached out to Jared and said, look, obviously, I've been over. I've come to your event. I've spoke at your event. I just want you to know I'm doing this, and I'm not
stepping on your toes.
I don't want to step on your toes, and I just want you to
be aware of it.
I want you to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And he responded by going, "Oh my god, it sounds so exciting! I want to come." So at the time of recording, I know he's trying to work out with his wife.
That would be awesome
if he can come over, which would be great. So the event takes place on the 23rd of November. The list that we have of the people involved is just ridiculous.
Almost seems like you can't fit it in.
Yeah. So
one day.
So what we decided to do was we when we started this, we went, let's just do something, and we just built it from the ground. And if we'd gone about it in so there's a lady called Janet Murray who has a really good podcast as well, and she's a former journalist. She's been doing a podcast in this lifestyle now for about 5 years, where she runs online courses, teaches you how to get press and PR without having press and PR, amongst other things. And I met Janet when I was speaking at another event in America last year, and she hired me to speak at her event. And her podcast is edited by a guy that lives in Croatia, I think. Igor. Anyway, Igor had a family emergency and couldn't edit the podcast. And Janet just put out a little thing last minute kind of going, can anybody help me out? And because Janet's been very good to me, I was like, I've got time this afternoon. Just send me the files. I'll put it together for you. And it just so happened that we'd launched this and started doing it, and we're having all these problems. And that episode was about how to grow your audience, which is basically what her theme now. She's moving her audience towards this. That's what the show's going to be: how to grow your audience. And it was about how to do things like events. And I'm listening to this, and she says, like, don't start with like a big event. Just do an event for 10 people, and then build it up, and then go to her. And it's really sound advice, and it works brilliantly. And
it works with many things.
It's the complete opposite of what we've done. And I was listening, I was putting this together, editing, kind of going, oh God. And the thing is, like, Janet's not just some lady off the internet.
She knows what
she's doing. She's really good. But yeah, so we're making a lot of, we've made a lot of kind of schoolboy errors, I think, with some things. But actually, it's all come together. We found a way through it.
You're always going to make mistakes at the beginning.
Yeah, it's like a new company. I mean, the biggest mistake that I'm gonna put this out here before I get called out on it by somebody else. So I had a meeting with Mark Asquith at Rebel Base Media. They've launched Captivate recently, which is an alternative to Libsyn and those kinds of podcast hosting platforms. So I had a meeting with them. I'm actually going to speak with him 2 days from now and speak at an event with his team. I don't know if I'm brave enough to say it there, but during that meeting, considering that we were angling for some sponsorship for them, I got the name of the product wrong.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Schoolboy error.
Yeah, I can't even remember what I called it now. Creativity, that's what I called it.
And it was meant to be?
Captivate. What an idiot. Like, that's the kind of thing on The Apprentice that you're packing your bags.
Yeah.
I'm not even going into that meeting. I'm just going.
Yeah.
I'm just ordering the cab and going. But no, Mark's great. And again,
even they would understand. People make mistakes.
So I'm very aware that I'm jumping around and I'm just throwing names,
going back to the Spotify thing. So other than them putting their name to it, what does it mean for you guys?
Okay, so.
Which, I mean, obviously, just putting their name to it adds a bit of legitimacy to it. It gives you a bit momentum, brand awareness, all that. But what else does it offer?
So there's some things that we're hoping to do which haven't been confirmed. But what we'd like to do, and again, this is difficult. So this might be in, it might not be in. But they are going to put on a after party, which is great, which can be the networking part. So we can focus more on the day in terms of learning and
that's a big part of podcast conventions, is the networking.
And what I was just going to say about Mark Asquith, actually, the reason why the network's important is all the time I've known Mark Asquith, in 3 years, I've only ever seen him once outside of America. And I live in Manchester and he lives in Sheffield. So that's one of the reasons for doing this event. The irony being he can't actually make it because he's going to Las Vegas with his girlfriend that weekend.
Of course he is. Of course
Anyway,
he is.
Yeah. So in terms of what they're going to do, one of the things again, this is awkward, but hit a marker on the file here.
Yeah.
So in terms of Spotify, what we're going to do for the event is we're going to have 2 Spotify playlists,
Right.
which will be a playlist of all the speakers that are going to be at the event of their podcasts.
Of course, now you can have playlists of podcasts now, can't you?
Yeah, and Spotify, I have to say this for all the other people that are out there and other potential sponsors we're still talking to, Spotify just get it right. And it's because that you look at the market share. Spotify only came in really 2 years ago to having podcasts on their platform. They let a select few in. Now they've gone full out.
I was one of the first.
10% of all podcasts are listened to through Spotify. They're number 2.
Yeah, and they've quickly established themselves, and it's still growing, isn't it?
Yep, still growing. So we're going to have a playlist of all the speakers and anybody that's attending, anybody that buys a ticket. We're going to have a playlist of everybody that's going to be there as well. So
That's
it's a really
cool.
easy reference. So you just tell us your favourite episode that you've done or an episode that you want to showcase.
That's really cool.
And we're going to put that on. And
that's like a festival of playlists of all the bands that are playing.
Exactly.
That's cool.
And
That's
so
really cool.
Because we want it to be a celebration of everybody that's there. Also, we're... there's some other things that are going to happen. So Spotify are hopefully... We're just working out who and what they're going to do, but there may be an opportunity to pitch to Spotify because they're starting to create their own original
They
content
are,
as
aren't
well.
they? Yeah. They've signed some people up, some big celebrities to do podcasts on there.
There's lots of stuff happening along those lines.
Spotify seems very on the front foot in terms of podcasting these last couple of years. Like you said, they just seem to be all over it.
Yeah, I think there is an argument to say it's a sound business model for them because if you're paying your Spotify subscription, and you're not listening to any music, you're just listening to podcasts, they're not paying any money out. So it's a really sound business model.
That's true. Yeah.
But what's really nice about it is what they do compared to the other platforms out there is they make it really easy to playlist your own podcast.
Yeah. I was so happy when I saw that announcement.
You curate your own radio station. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Just have all your favourite podcasts and you can share it with people. And like Pods Up North, obviously, all your favourite podcasts, put them all on a list.
And so there's so many hoops when you're working with a company the size of Spotify. What I would like to happen is that the week of Pods Up North, they put the Pods Up North playlist on the front page of the podcast. That's what we're hoping for. And I'll have to say, I would be surprised if it doesn't happen because they've been brilliant. It's been really good to deal with them, even though I'm not allowed to talk to them directly because I get too excited.
I think I would be the same.
Yeah, but
schoolboy comes out in here.
Yeah. So the great thing is assuming it all goes according to plan, the show will come out once we've announced this.
Yeah.
So I can talk about it now. But the really exciting thing about it is even before the Spotify involvement, even before we've announced any other sponsors, we've already sold a third of the tickets to the event.
That's brilliant. What's the maximum attendance you could have?
It's only 150.
That's a perfect size to start with.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
I think.
we still have a few moments being nervous, but at this point, at this far out, considering I'm used to doing different types of events, similar to you with doing gigs and things, you're used to, if you sell 10 or 20 tickets in advance, that's great.
Yeah, it's a good start.
And it's just it's the
especially at the beginning.
So it's and Spotify being involved is really great. It gives us an opportunity to do some other things, like we can have tea and coffee now and feed people, but also it brings some other names to us. But we've done really well in terms of the names that we've got.
Yeah,
I'll just do a little stop down here just so that we can. If we don't mention the Spotify thing, we can come back.
That was the Spotify section.
That was the Spotify section.
Yeah.
So, do you want to ask me who's coming in? Who's the?
Just go for it.
Yeah,
just go for it.
So we've got some amazing people lined up for the day. We're going to start with Jonathan Wall, who's the controller of BBC Sounds.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's really good. Obviously, it helps that we've got Media City based in Salford, and some, but most of the sound stuff is done in London these days. And we haven't announced the running of the sessions, but obviously there's the opportunity there because BBC Sounds, I don't know if you're aware of this, are actually buying up podcasts and commissioning podcasts and bringing things in.
I saw bits and pieces, yeah.
And a lady we've got coming down from Scotland, actually, Vanessa Canby, who does the podcast Magnificent Mothers. She is coming down to do a session for us on the day, and she's also been commissioned to make a show for BBC Sounds as well.
That's cool.
And what the really exciting thing about that is they've just kind of gone, make us a show. There's a budget.
Perfect. Perfect.
Which is the dream. We've got Katie Leeson from Social Chain, which she is the star of her own podcast, and they kind of did that as a demonstration of like how she didn't really want to do that, but they were like, well, let's chart the progress of making a podcast, and that's what she does. We've got a whole bunch of podcasts and podcasters, again, including a very exciting potential guest that we've got who I've been communicating with on Twitter. I'm having a coffee with him. How can I say this? He's available. He wants to do it, and he has a podcast that people will know, and he's also been on TV.
I think I know who you're talking about. We'll talk about it afterwards.
But again, all these things might be announced. But what's really been great for me is, I mean, I've not even gone through the list. What we'll do is we'll put I'll give you a link for the show notes. Also, as well, what I'm going to do, because you'll let me come in and take over the show.
Yeah, that's fine. Do what you want.
So tickets are £75.
Yeah.
But we'll give you a code, so they're £50. So anybody that listens to the show can come for that price.
Sweet.
So that was the early bird price that we offered, which is gone, but we'll honour that for anybody listening. I don't know exactly what the code is. My colleagues have just sent me something, so
we'll put it in the show notes as well.
But so that encourages you to listen to the. I'll do part of it at the end and then part of it in the show notes, so they have to listen.
And
do both.
This guy's a pro.
So where was I?
Speakers that you've got.
Yeah, speakers that we've got.
A lot.
We've got a lot, and we've got different platforms.
Have you got to a point where we need to stop now? We've got too many.
So yeah, well, actually, so what it started with is we just like, let's just try and get like a day of speakers, and just run like 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon.
Not 4 a.m. in the morning.
Although it does start at 9:30. So we thought, let's do 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, and then it expanded. Right now we have 22 speakers, with potentially another 6 or 7 coming.
To fit in what time frame?
To fit in between 9:30 and 5:30 with lunch and coffee breaks.
So will there be some speaking at the same time?
So we're going to run. There's going to be a few breakout sessions, and there's going to be a few where they're on stage at the same time.
Right.
So, for example, we've got the Naked podcast. They're coming over from Sheffield.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know, that the 2 presenters, they interview people, and everybody's naked when they do the interview.
Now that will attract a crowd.
Yeah. Yes. So if you buy your ticket now, then no.
Nakedness.
Yeah, even I'm not allowed to take my short clothes off for this. So, but they'll be there, and they're going to be on in the morning, I think, as well. We're going to have a couple of panels as well of different topics. So we've got quite a lot of different sports shows involved as well, from netball to football to rugby to all sorts of coming in.
Yeah.
We've got Fight Disciples, Adam Catterall from that show, multi-award-winning show at the RAs and the BPAs, always beats my shows to awards. Jim Salverson, who I do On the Left Side with, and also the Sports Social, he's going to be there talking about different things, and also the work that he does with Communicorp and how they're moving into VoiceWorks and all the interesting things. We've got Jay from Full Time Devils. We've got potentially somebody from the Anfield Rap coming over as well. All doing slightly different things. I think sport's a really interesting model for podcasting, actually, if you stop and think about it, because just with those shows there, Fight Disciples, On the Left Side, which I work on, and the Anfield Rap, all 3 of those shows have beaten the BBC to critical acclaim and awards in the last couple of years, and the likes of TalkSport and other commercial stations. And if you think about it, like, that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen because you have, first of all, as the BBC or TalkSport or ITV, you have a network of talent, you have all the rights, and you have all the access and equipment. And podcasts are not done live; they're after the event. So I think in some ways there's something about sports podcasting which is a model for why podcasts work.
I suppose it depends on what the podcast is and the chemistry between the presenters. You can't sort of buy that, I don't know how much money you've got. If you put the right presenters together, it can just be amazing.
Yeah, and the thing is that, don't get me wrong, because they do some very good ones. I mean, the one that comes straight to mind, even if you don't like football, I highly recommend that Peter Crouch podcast.
Yeah, I listened to that. It's fantastic. It's hilarious.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
He's always been really funny.
Yeah.
He's always been really funny on Twitter and the likes of that. But
it's just explode. I mean, they did that live one not that long ago.
Yeah, Crouchella.
Was it Liam Gallagher? Somebody popped in. I'm sure it was Liam Gallagher.
It wouldn't surprise me.
I think it was.
I just remember, I was away at the time. I remember seeing the social media of him doing the robot one last time.
Yeah, he did it. Yeah.
So that's great. That's a great show. And the BBC. The BBC do some really interesting things. Jason Phipps, who was at The Guardian now, went over to sort of take over podcasts before Sounds was launched. I know Jason. Jason's the kind of person that hasn't listened to the radio for 6 years. He's a real podcast addict. And he's driving a lot of things that are happening there. At least that's the way I read it.
Yeah.
He's too busy now. He doesn't return my calls.
I was wondering about BBC Sounds. I was confused at the beginning when they first launched. I was wondering if they were trying to say that BBC Sounds is the only place you can get their podcasts, or is that as well as like a hub where you can get them?
Yeah.
Or are there podcasts available on all the other platforms?
Well, it's funny, isn't it, that we're seeing a similar thing happening with TV now, aren't we, as well, in terms of like you now have to have, if you want to watch everything, you're going to have Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, Now TV, all those things to get there, and your Sky subscription.
Yeah.
How long that lasts for, don't know.
Yeah, because there's talk like Disney's going to pull their content from all the platforms and have their own platform.
Yeah.
So,
which I'm going to have to get for that Boba Fett thing.
I didn't know about BBC Sounds. Are they available everywhere?
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure on how that's working, because there are some shows that they've brought in under that umbrella. There are BBC shows that you don't have to listen. You can listen to on other platforms as well.
I thought it makes a good alternative because they have a lot of content. So if you want one place to get it all, go for it.
Completely.
I mean, I've got it. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And what's very interesting as well is just this week, I don't know if you see. So Apple have rolled out their latest update, which finally separates iTunes. iTunes is
it's going. It's still on desktop.
Yeah,
but that's about it.
Desktop on the PC.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to disappear from your Mac as well.
Yeah, it is.
But what you've done is they've basically followed what the BBC have done.
Yeah.
And so BBC is radio, music, podcasts.
Yeah. It makes more sense though. If you want to get your average listener who's not very advanced on things, just separate everything, make it easy to understand. Yeah. That's that. I mean, you'll get more of your average punter in then, I think.
The interesting thing about the BBC is the BBC really, they were doing podcasts effectively 10, maybe 12 years ago.
Yeah, they used to do podcasts of their shows and stuff.
Now, the problem with that is, although it kind of got podcasts in the vernacular, if you will, and people familiar with them, they weren't really podcasts. And so because they still adhere to the rules of radio. And what started to happen was they started, and you're seeing it now more. So if you look at any of the awards that are happening around, like the British Podcast Awards, the ARIAs, the APAs, they have specific categories now for podcasts where it has to be done as a podcast, not as a radio show. That
it can't be like a compilation of a show already exists.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great thing for independent podcasters.
It is, because I remember at the beginning, some of the award shows, they were winning all the awards because they had the content already there.
And that's the thing. The number of times like I've spent money, and time putting award things together, and then go down and then lost out to Simon Mayo, Mark Commode again.
Yeah, I know. And
the thing is, I love that show. I'm a big fan of film, and I love the chemistry.
But they need to be separated, don't they?
Yeah. Now, the thing with those is, so with that show in particular, just as an example, and this is not me hating on anything, that is basically, it's a radio show that then is repurposed as a podcast, but they do an extra bit for the podcast.
Yeah.
They actually do that, and they've built up a community, which is really cool. And they can't always do the radio show because it's on a live sports station. So sometimes they just have to do it as a podcast. Yeah. And the great thing about that is, as I say to people, podcasts are like radio, but they're different.
Yeah, this is one of the things I was going to ask you. How do you describe a podcast if someone who doesn't know what they are asks you, what's a podcast?
A podcast is basically some noise that you make that you put on the internet for other people to listen to. That's it. That's it. The very basic. That's what it is.
I've heard so many different. It's like radio, but on demand. I've heard various different.
See,
ways
as soon as you say radio, though, that changes it, because as soon as you bring radio into it, you introduce other factors.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we were doing this interview now, you would have to stop me in a few minutes because of this traffic and travel.
Yeah,
coming up.
and
or
adverts.
Or you would kind of go, God, this guy's boring. let's just stop. But I can't stop now because it's half an hour till Dan turns up with his jazz show, right? So you kind of then and so it can't be naturally what it should be. Now, we've no idea how long this is going to go on. Those of you listening, watching, you may have noticed that I just jump around all over the place. It may never end.
It's quite normal on this show.
So. But the thing is, you with a radio show, you would be trying to control that. You'd be trying to control that and guide that. And my background is in radio, so I know how that works.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done interviews like this, where then you go and you edit it and you break it down to 3 minutes.
Yeah, I've seen that before. It's like, what's the point?
You know, and it's and people talk about now we get that with the news. But actually, we've been moving towards that for a while. We're in that kind of soundbite culture, and I think that's one of the reasons why podcasts have come back and had a success, because you've got this thing where you can talk like a real conversation.
Yeah.
Like look in your phone, go back through your phone list. I don't know if you've got an app or when you go through it, and it shows you like not just when you made the phone calls, but how long each call was.
Yeah.
And no two phone calls are the same length.
No.
Because you speak to different people at
About
different times
things.
about different things for different lengths.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what a podcast is people having a chat. Now, it's not just that, because I do a couple of podcasts that are completely different to that. But
for the most part.
the most part,
A lot of them are. Well, it's opened up a lot of doors. I was going to ask you, what is it about podcasts? Why do you think it's like captivated a large portion of the world?
Because I think it's fair to say that podcasts could save humanity.
Smooth, that is smooth.
I see. We legitimately got it in. No, I think that I was thinking about this on the way up today, and I think things have changed. So it used to be that the media kind of guided us and told us who to be, right? So it gave us pop stars, it gave us celebrities, it gave us things to strive for. You know, you want to be like this person, you want this success, you want all these things. And now what's happened is we've all become content creators with the likes of YouTube and with the likes of podcasting. And so instead of being told what to be, we have the opportunity now to tell the world who we are.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful thing. A friend of mine, Anthony Gay at Real World, he has this idea that podcasts are like therapy. Mm-hmm. Because what you do in therapy is you go and you talk.
You talk to someone the way you can't normally.
Yeah, because nobody interrupts you and you can listen. And so even though we're both here, whoever's listening to this now, whatever they say, we can't hear them. We can't interact with them. I mean, things are changing now because there are different apps like the likes of, I don't know if you've used Castbox, where they do a really great live thing on there, which is very similar to your Facebook Live, your Instagram Live, where people can call in and message as you're doing the show out the recording. And other platforms are introducing something similar. Castbox is really strong. Hi, Valentina. Yeah, so I think there is that thing of it's like it's empowering for people. Also as well, because of that change, it's not just the media. Suddenly we have this shift where voices are being heard that weren't heard before. So you're
very
moving
powerful voices.
Oh yeah,
well.
Incredibly. And the thing is, like, it's like because of people's heritage, their ethnicity, their gender, their particular circumstances, you know, they weren't given the opportunity to have their platform before.
Yeah.
Now, I met Earl from Ear Hustle in at the end of Podcast Movement this year. I have a picture of me having a hug with him, which is really cool. And for those of you that don't know that, this is a podcast that's made in a prison. And it's actually being replayed out on prison radio in the UK. And it's people, very frankly, that are prisoners talking about doing this, done as a product. And it's just real.
Just to hear that as an idea sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it's just now there is an argument. Some people I'm sure are going to say who've had experience of this is like, you know, why are we giving these people a voice? Because they're in prison for a reason. personally, I think it is given somebody an opportunity to help rehabilitate for whatever reason they're in there, and it's given them an option when they come out rather than just potentially going back to what they did
like
before.
I say, it's like it can be like a therapy, so it could help some people.
Yeah, and even that story, even just hearing of what they did that ended up getting them in prison. If that stops somebody else doing that and going to prison, then isn't that a good thing?
It's also, you never really get to hear their how they feel or what their side of the story, or because it happens, they get locked away, and then you never hear it. So it's interesting either way.
and we're moving into a very popular podcasting genre right now, which is true crime, and instantly I'm thinking of Serial, because what you've got there is a case where somebody went to prison for a murder, and then because of the podcast, that went to a retrial.
Yeah, that made
which
the news.
is, and I'm not going to give away what happens in that, but that did genuinely happen, and also that's responsible for a whole new genre.
I was going to say that it's probably one of the most popular, I would say.
Yeah.
There's so many true crime podcasts.
I tell you what, I don't like it.
No, I was going to say I'm not a fan.
It's like, so I one of my first jobs, I worked on Crime Watch,
right?
At
Okay.
the BBC, and
what a life you've led.
it was I've done a few things. I said keep the tape running. So I worked on Crime Watch. Some of my favourite stories are from that time, actually. Only for about 6 weeks. So it's like my first break into the media, and I got a work experience slot. And I had just finished my psychology degree and got pushed to the top of the pile because they were doing a special show about a case with a lady who had been mutilated after she'd been murdered.
Right.
And if you might want to turn this down if you've got kids in the car. But basically, the murderer put knives in her eyes after they killed her. So they not killed her that way. They put the knives, and so then it became this whole thing about. So one of the reasons why I was brought in was to be a researcher about the significance of the soul, the connection, and this was before Wikipedia. So it wasn't easy to find that kind of information just off the shelf. And working on that show was really interesting. It wasn't long after Jill Dando had been killed.
Right, which was 97?
97, yeah. So I was there in 2000,
right.
So when I was working. And because of that, there was an impact on the BBC. So security, they were very security conscious. But also, like, there was a little bit of paranoia about certain people. And there was one person in particular, I won't say who it was, but if you watch the show, you'll know who I mean. And he came up to me like the first time I was in the office and shook my hand, and I was like, and he introduced himself, and I was like, I know who you are. And I was like, that's really weird. You're such this big name celebrity. But I thought that's nice, but actually some people said maybe because of what happened, he becomes very anxious about people he doesn't know around the environment.
Right.
And so even to the point where he would have meetings stopped and people removed because he didn't know who they were, and then carry on the meeting. And you can understand that something like that's happened to you, having that impact. But then it goes the other way. And having just graduated in psychology, I was very interested in how people dealt with things. And there was people in that room who would say it affects people differently. Like some people will not let their children even to play in the garden because of they're working all day around crime. Like all they do all day is reading about crime, researching crime, making films about crime.
Yeah.
Then there's other people that because they do that, they do the opposite, and they're just like, they let the kids do what they want. They leave the doors unlocked. They're just like, live your life. Don't worry about it. It does lead to some very interesting conversations. So,
I can imagine,
like you're in the office, it's just like any normal office. Somebody's on the phone, somebody else over there. It's like, Mark, what was the name of that hotel where we did that really good double murder? Right? And that's just like a standard conversation.
Yeah.
And this, I'm having second thoughts about telling this story, but basically what they do is when they put the show together, they try and construct it in terms of how they the thing that they say at the end, don't have nightmares.
Yeah.
Right? And so they try and, mix it up so that you don't have, because they could literally do it stabbings in London at the minute.
Yeah.
Right? The whole thing could be that, which is a really sad state of affairs.
It certainly is.
But it could be. But they don't want you to think that everyone that goes to London will get stabbed. Because statistically that's not true, just to put people's mind at rate.
Absolutely.
So, but what they would do is they would have a stabbing, and they would have a murder, and they would have, some kind of assault somewhere else, and they would have a fraud, and they would have a con man, and they would have all these different things, but they would be spread out across the country. Now, there's two reasons for that. One, it's to make it so you don't feel like, you're in murder capital wherever you live. Secondly, it's because the people that are answering the phones would be people like me. And you have a list in front of you, and you would maybe do 20 different things in the show, and people would phone up and go, I'm calling about the murder in Leeds, right? Or I'm calling about the con man in Sheffield, right? And so very quickly you can get to the details and write the information on that sheet, because that might be a lead that's really good for the police. Anyway, they've changed the way they make the show now, but what they used to do was they would send out a crew to make a little video and a reconstruction.
Yep.
But then what would sometimes happen is they would make an arrest. And so if they've made an arrest before the show goes out, you can't show that because you're in contempt of court.
Right.
So they had to stop. So what would happen is you would start to build the show and then have to stop it and have these big holes in the show. So what they do now is they just send out a researcher and they basically do selfie videos and just speak. So the format's changed a lot because it was costing a lot of money and wastage. But what would happen is the show would go out on a Wednesday, and on a Friday you would have a big production meeting, and two like they must have been 5'3", 5'4", these two ladies that ran the show at the time, and you'd present to them what was coming on the show. I wouldn't. I was just in the room, and so they'd start to build it up, and they go, "Well, we'll lead with that, and we'll put that there and here," and then they go, "Oh, we've got to pull that one because they've arrested someone," and they just sit there and look at it, and I just remember one of them kind of going, "You know what we need? We need a really good armed robbery." Oh well, maybe it'll happen at the weekend, and that would be it. And it's because what they were doing is they were creating effectively an entertainment product.
It's like a formula for how the show should run, I suppose. Yeah. So they want a variety of crimes all the time. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
So yeah, I don't know how I got into that.
No. Well, going back to Pods Up North, which is why you're here. When you started the idea for it, what is your demographic?
So the demographic is basically anybody outside of London in the UK that is involved in podcasting, has a love for podcasting, wants to take podcasting seriously, wants to learn about podcasting, wants to meet podcasters. So that's what it's about.
It's quite varied, really, yeah.
So we're going to, because of the support that we've had for it, the fact that we can spread out and have different tracks on the day as well, is going to be an opportunity. So if you're coming, so for example, like
explain to people if people don't know what a track is.
So a track would be, I've just learned this word recently, so that you would, rather than just having like a day of lectures or a day of things going on where everyone sits in the same room and does that, you would have like a breakout session where you switch and you go, and so you can kind of, so in this room it's going to be all about social marketing, and so we'd have 3 or 4 speakers, one after the other. One would be about like how to improve your engagement on Instagram, how to put your episode on Twitter, those kind of things. And then in the next room, it would be maybe how to improve the sound quality of your episode just with the equipment that you've got, just some simple tricks and hacks that they can do that. And then there would be similar technical things about there. And then maybe the other one would be more about the facts and figures, so like monetisation, how to understand your statistics, how to like break through that, and then how to sell to people. So those would be the different tracks that we're going. And so on the day, it's going to be the option, and you're never going to get to see everything. No. But there'll be the choice. So if you think this is right up, this is good for me,
so I'll pick your lineup for the day.
Yeah. And so there's going to be certain speakers that will be for everyone, and then people will break out and go into the other rooms. So if you, the 3 things we looked at was people that are just starting on the journey or like podcasts and quite want to start a podcast and get some inspiration, because we always find this when we go to these events. The next level would be people that have been running a podcast maybe for 2 years. Maybe they've, got a sponsor on board, but they want to take it to the next level. Yeah. And then also the people that we're aiming at is people who are making a living from it, who are living the dream, that have got the show out there, that are making money, but also to reach a new audience, to tie in. And the ultimate thing really, when you look at where we are right now, there's me, you and Tech in a big hall and nobody else here. Yeah. people record in different locations, different times,
People
different places.
record in the cupboard under the stairs.
Exactly. And so podcasting is a very isolated, very lonely occupation. And even when, like, I don't know how many listeners you get to this show, but if you had all these listeners in the hall right
I've
now,
thought of that,
it would be a completely different energy, wouldn't it?
Even if you say 1,000 people,
Yeah,
you think 1,000 people, that's quite a lot of people. But if you imagine them in a room listening to you talk, you think, oh,
yeah,
it puts a different perspective.
It does
on it,
completely.
doesn't it?
But this is the thing: even if you have 10,000 people listening, you never see them.
No,
You never meet them.
no.
So you could, whatever it is that you're doing, you unless you start going out and doing live shows, you don't see them. So it's quite an isolated world. And so part of what we're doing with this is a way to bring people together and share that energy and
See the rest of the community who are doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You know, and
it's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that we're going to form like a podcasters union, although maybe that will come further down the line.
Yeah.
But what we're looking at is just bringing people together and sharing ideas, experience, and building a community. That's the and also to shine a spotlight on it to everybody outside of the North, because there's so much focus, as there is with other things, politically, economy, all those things. It's all about London, and I love London. I love going there. I love the people there. I lived there for 5 years, but there's so much more than that.
Of course. What was the first podcast you listened to?
So the first podcast I listened to was awful.
Is that the name of it?
It would have been in 2005.
Wow.
And was it 2005? No, 2004. And
which is when podcasting started, wasn't it?
Podcasting started in 2003, and then in 2004, Apple invented it. Work that one out. So I listened to one of the. So what happened was I was at Leeds Festival and pitched my tent next to this guy who helpfully pointed out I'd done it wrong. So then I took it down, redid it, and then went, actually, no, you were right the first time. And we became mates, if only because he was friends with one of the riggers for Leeds. And on the last day, while watching Jimmy Eat World, he says to me, do you want to come backstage? And I ended up side stage for Foo Fighters.
Holy shit.
Yes, it's exactly what I thought. And at one stage, I was no further from Dave Grohl than I am from you. And
wow.
I was just behind the netting. And so looking out to this side to where Tech's at right now, I could see right through the netting and see 50,000 people.
Wow.
And where you are, Dave Grohl came out to the little B stage with the guitar, and there was a full moon. And I had a little happy snap camera, which did not do it justice at all. But just that image is burnt in my. It was a really cool moment. And I saw him getting ready backstage as well. I was actually there with my little brother. It was his first festival. He'd gone to see Muse instead of Jimmy Eat World. And our phones.
I was at that one.
Our phones were running out of battery, right? Because we've been there the whole time. And I was like, dude, I'm going backstage for Foo Fighters. Come meet me now. But obviously, it's like, this is like before we had WhatsApp location, all those kinds of stuff.
And chargers.
No chance. And so I had to go through and just abandon my little brother. But he was like, I was like, oh, I'm sorry, dude. I almost didn't go. And he was like, if you'd not gone in, I would have punched you. So I kind of feel all right about that now.
So your first podcast, though?
So the first podcast, honestly, I can't remember the name of it. But what happened was, so Chris, you're doing very well reeling me in. Chris was the guy that met Chris Dunn, who was working on a thing called RSS, which I'd never heard of. And he was working on RSS 3, as it was back then. And for those of you that don't know, RSS is what allows podcasts to happen. And it's the same thing that you get with when your phone has an update. Basically, whenever you switch your phone in or it connects to the update, it sends a little message and says, you got anything for me? And they go, oh yeah, we got an update. Or this app's got an update, or this, whatever. And somebody realized very early on that you could use that to create sequential audio. So that if you've listened to this last episode, you can subscribe and you'll get a little notification to say, there's a new episode ready. And that became podcasting. Now, what happened was the people that made the first podcasts were coders. And the people that did that, and they recorded just using the microphones that they had on their computers, which back in 2003, 2004 weren't very good.
No.
I mean, to be honest, let's be honest, the microphones you have on your computers today aren't very good either.
Nope.
So, I heard it and instantly saw the potential, but thought it was awful.
There was no infrastructure then, was there?
No. So that's when I made my first podcast. And
Wow.
yeah, so that would have been 2004 we had the meeting. Yeah, because the other thing that inspired it was at the time I was trying to launch a new music show and none of the radio stations would touch it. Funnily enough, it's pretty much what BBC Introducing is now.
Yeah.
And so we were trying to come up with these formats. Nobody was interested. Nobody
Were you
wanted
trying to do that in Manchester or just anywhere?
I was in London at the time.
Oh, you were in London,
And
right,
I was trying to
right.
pitch it to all the commercial stations and the BBC there.
That's a crowded market down there.
Exactly. So there was lots of options, and you had XFM at the time and those kinds of things. But nobody was really interested in it, partly because at that time XFM was just about to change, because XFM, when it launched, so for those of you that maybe sort of newer to radio, is what was there before Radio X, and it was more and it was way more alternative when it launched. Even I dare say that both of us listening to it, in an hour's listening, there would be at least 6 songs we didn't know.
Yeah.
And from bands we'd never heard of as well. Which
you don't get much of that these days.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen, and it's because it was very difficult to commercialise that. There were certain brands that would go with it, but only certain, and so that's kind of led to that brand's demise. It kind of expanded, it grew quickly and stuff. But even XFM weren't interested in that show at that time. And John Peel died around about the same time.
Yeah.
And so we had this conversation in the pub, and it was like, so what's going to happen now? What is going to happen?
Because he was like the gatekeeper, wasn't he?
Exactly. He was your one way in. And so Chris, who I was out having a drink with, said to me, what about, I say Chris, it sounds weird, Dunny. Dunny says to me, what about podcasts? And I was like, what's that then? Now, at the time, I think the iPod had only just been released in the UK.
Did iTunes come with the relaunch of the iPod?
Now you're testing me.
I think that was 2007 when iTunes came about. I think.
I
don't know when that was the first iPhone.
don't know. No, the first iPhone came 2007. So you were looking at the iPod arrived in about 2001.
Yes, it did.
For music. Yeah.
Yes, it did, because I had one then as well.
Yeah.
You're right.
And
so iTunes came after that.
And actually, it was that inspired me. So that's the sound guy's just fallen down the stairs on the way to the bathroom. It was a controlled fall. It's like, see, in normal radio stations, what they would have is a countdown to the news to say like they've had enough. Go. Yeah, the sound engineer.
They just go.
Starts self-harming.
He's that good. He can just leave us and everything's fine.
So actually, that the iPod actually inspired the name of my first podcast that I made. So, because if you'd never seen it, there was some really cool advertising campaigns by Apple at the time. Yeah. So even before the iPod came along, and this is when Jobs was at the height of his power, you had the iMac, which up until that point, all computers had been dull and grey and black. The odd one would be black. Literally, it was beige or black. Those were the colour choices you had.
Yeah, like that sort of thing wasn't even consideration for
it wasn't an option. And then it came around with the Mac, and it was amazing. It just an explosion of color. It was great. And then when they did the iPod, the ad campaign was all silhouetted.
Yeah.
So you had black silhouettes dancing on a colored background
I remember that.
with white headphone cables.
Cable, I remember that.
Going to the and that up till that point, having headphones was always like it was like a pain. It was like, but they celebrated having the cable. It was like the main thing.
Yeah.
Now what happened was there was a spate of robberies because it was really easy to spot who had an iPod because nobody else had white headphones.
That's true. Yeah.
Because you got the white headphones with the iPod, and so I remember reading an article where a policeman had given advice, said, we advise you to use different coloured headphones when listening to your iPod to stop you being a target. And that was the inspiration for the title for my first podcast, and then still a producer name that I sometimes use, which was Paint Your Headphones. And I kind of created this myth, which was like, and I've never found the original article again. I remember it as saying, use different colour headphones or paint the ones you've got. And I just loved that idea. And again, having this audio medium which had a visual reference.
Yeah.
Paint your headphones. And so what that was I put together a team of about 20 people to make the show. Writers. Okay. Writers, musicians, actors, and editors.
What was the premise of the show?
So I'd been trying to launch this new music show for a while, wasn't getting anywhere. One of the reasons for that was because people do struggle to hear new music. They struggle to. It's quite a tiring thing to listen to, and even now, if you listen to a big radio station, what they'll do if they've got a new song, even if it's by an established artist, they will sandwich it between safe bets. So a big hit of the year or a classic hit. Yeah. So that you kind of like, if you're a bit freaked out, and that might sound a little bit weird, but say your System of a Down come back with a new album, and you're like super excited. It's very rare that you would listen to it and straight away the first time go, that's amazing. There'll be the odd track in it where you go, oh, I like that. It's the kind of thing where you listen to it 3, 4, 5 times and you go, oh, yeah.
Grows on you.
Yeah, it grows on you and you get into it and you appreciate it. And that's one of the things that now pop music tends to do a little bit more, like hit you straight away and be catchy. That's what it's aimed to do. Whereas,
and then it wears off.
Yeah. So there's all these different elements. And so I was trying to juggle this thing. Also, because it was a new medium, I was like, oh, we don't have to follow Ofcom regulations, so we can play around with things a little bit more. And also, I was like, but what about music rights? Now, they still haven't sorted out music rights now.
No, there's another thing I've wanted to talk to you about.
There's something very interesting in podcastmusic.com happening in America. I'll make a note of that and tell you about that.
Yeah.
I have some sunglasses from them, from podcast. So the idea was we just use unsigned bands and then it would give them a platform. But then the thing is, unsigned bands, you think, oh, well, maybe they're not very good. But you know yourself, there's some great stuff out there. Yeah. It just doesn't get the exposure. And so I had this idea, again, a little bit ahead of its time. Kind of, this is a bold claim, but around the same time, I basically invented something that was like Wikipedia and something that was like Dropbox.
Right.
But neither of them took off, and then I just mothballed them. Right. And then a few years later, I was like, oh, bloody hell, I should have stuck with that. So I had this group of people all working together, and I took inspiration from Trigger Happy TV. So if you've never seen it, go back and watch it on YouTube. It's amazing. Dom Jolly, Trigger Happy TV. And what was really good about that, one of the things, as well as the comedy of the sketches, the soundtrack to that was so good.
Yeah, it was a key component. It's the type of thing that you don't notice, though. But
exactly.
if it wasn't there, you would definitely notice the difference.
When people say to me, what's your favourite musical genre? I'm so eclectic. So at one point in my career, I was working for Classic FM, Kerrang, and the Radio 1 dance shows all at the same time of the week, and Tim Westwood, right? So that was my week. It was so varied. Plus, I was doing regular shifts at Virgin Megastores Radio, where I would have to play world music every hour. Right. So my musical education that's why I'm nailed on with the iPod. Between 2000 and 2005, I'm the man to call if you get a pub quiz question that you're stuck on. I've lost where I was going again now because I was saying how great I am. This is an interesting point. I'm just making more work for you to have
Trigger Happy TV.
Yeah, okay.
We're moving fast.
We'll pick on Trigger Happy TV. So the great thing about Trigger Happy TV, so that's a little edit point for you.
Audio cue.
Yeah.
Nice one.
The great thing about Trigger Happy TV was that they would do this thing where they would have that cool music and the sketch. And I thought 90% of the sketches on Trigger Happy TV were great. But even the ones that I didn't quite get, I didn't find as good. I knew that there'd be a cool piece of music and then something else that comes along. Also, with that in mind, it fitted into my genre because having had this eclectic background of working in all these different stations and different genres of music at the same time, it kind of fitted into what's always been my favourite genre of music, which has been movie soundtracks.
Right. I love a good soundtrack.
Yeah. And so I took movie soundtracks and inspiration from Trigger Happy TV and created Paint Your Headphones. And so what we had was it sounded like you were listening to an album soundtrack of a movie you never saw. And so you would have a sketch, a song, a sketch, a song, a sketch, a song.
Right.
And they would all be blended in together. So the whole thing became a soundscape. And the idea was that you very quickly would learn that if you didn't like the sketch, if you didn't find it funny, at least the music would be cool. And if the music wasn't up your street, there's
a sketch coming.
There's a sketch coming. and we wouldn't play the whole song. We'd maybe play 90 seconds or 2 minutes, which the bands were all right about. And that was a difficult thing to get across because at this point, like downloads were the big thing. Everybody hated Napster, and the way you had to listen to a podcast was to download it because you couldn't stream the data at the time because the connection wasn't good enough, at least in the UK.
Yeah.
So that created problems when they say we're going to download your music. They're like, whoa, yeah, and still to this day causes a problem. So we made the show. We made 4 episodes of it, and the idea was that each show would be a different color. So we had blue, red, yellow, and green. And green never got released, and shortly after I made the first one, I got a job doing a full-time radio show in North Wales, and then the kind of project kind of fell apart because I wasn't on site, which is why I was trying to create this Dropbox type thing.
Right.
Like what I actually called it Sandbox.
All right. Okay.
So I had this idea for a sample. So it says like, so with my web guy, I'm no coder, but I had my web guy, and I said, can we have like some kind of sandbox where like I can write a script and put it in there, and then somebody else can take that script and record the vocals, and then put the vocals back in there, and then somebody else takes it and that puts that in the session to make it, which is what Dropbox is.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, Wikipedia is a different story, but
you strike me as one of those people who has far too many plates spinning at the same time.
Yeah, that's happening at the minute.
Maybe you used to.
It's happening again. So at the minute, I'm organising pods up north with the lovely Kate and Vic. And to be honest, if it wasn't for them, it wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
So because they keep me on the straight and narrow.
What are their roles in all this then?
Mostly just kind of going, oh God, focus.
Someone who says no to you.
Yeah. No. So the three of us are all running, and we all have different strengths. So. We come from slightly different backgrounds. So Kate has a podcast, which is actually an Alexa skill, and it's huge, ridiculous number of downloads, called Everyday Positivity.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. That was her idea. It runs out. It's massive. It's huge. You can get it as a flash briefing, and it's just 2 minutes. So you wake up in the morning. It's a little bit like Thought for the Day on Radio 4, but it's a real get up and go. And it's almost become a movement in itself. And Vic has been running a community-based podcasting thing called Mike in Manchester for a while to bring different podcasters together. Then a podcast edit club that meets together, brings in different speakers, really building the community. And she's just launched as a social enterprise as well. Her background's in charity.
Right.
And so they've got, like, in terms of events and organisation, she's the one.
Just what you need.
And then I just go, hey, I've got a beard.
You're like the mouthpiece you are.
I'm the mouth. But yeah, so
beard.
So plate spinning, it's a lot. So been doing that. Obviously here for this interview. Thursday I'm in Sheffield to do a similar thing with Rebel Base Media for their meetup. Last week I was recording the sound for Life and Lipstick, which is
I saw this online. I wasn't. Oh, I didn't know what you were doing there. I didn't know what part you were. I thought, is he on the podcast?
Yeah. So this is not my podcast, but I was. They needed somebody to record the sound, and I was available, and I just did that. And I think what happened was they just needed somebody that could do a decent job and record it. And Hannah and Lisa that did the show. I mean, it's not my thing at all.
No,
at all.
But you can do it.
It was great to be there, and there was prosecco. So it was.
You're like, I'm in.
I was in. Then I was doing the Football Social Daily on the Friday. And I'm doing that again this Friday.
The Football Social Daily.
Right. So this is the only daily Premier League show done by fans.
Okay.
Right. And that comes out of Manchester, and they have a rotating cast of hosts. And so I will do occasionally sort of 2 or 3 a month, but this month for various reasons I've done about 4 or 5.
Right.
Just covering for different people. And so it kind of positions itself as, if you think of the BBC's kind of, ex-players and expert pundits and journalists, and you kind of have that a little bit with the likes of TalkSport as well.
Yeah.
Whereas this kind of angles it as like, we have a couple of journalists in, but we're all fans.
Right.
So
fairly knowledgeable fans, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like people that would get enthusiastic and passionate, where you don't have to be as impartial as you do on the BBC, and also you're not being as opinionated to get a response from people as you might do on other stations.
Right.
So you're just kind of doing it. And so
what's it called? It's called.
So that's called the Football Social Daily.
Make a note of that, Tech.
Yeah.
I'm going to subscribe to that.
Yeah. The Football Social Daily. So that goes out every day, and so they have a short episode sort of during the week, and then on a Saturday morning and a Sunday evening you get a longer episode because obviously you're previewing and reviewing all the games that are happening. And so at the minute, I'm mostly doing those on the Saturday, although we record late on the Friday.
You do it remotely?
No, I'm doing that in Manchester.
Right.
So we do that, record that. I then also occasionally will do their flash briefings for them because as part of that same brand that they're building, the Sports Social, there's a skill on your Amazon Alexa.
You might need to explain what they are to some people who might not know.
Okay, so you can... What's the best way of doing it?
It's for smart speakers, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's like having a playlist. So you can set up your own playlist that changes every day. So, for example, and especially as we're moving towards, I mean, I've done a lot on voice separately as well, but we're moving to a situation where voice potentially is going to be seamless in terms of from your bedroom to your kitchen to your car to your laptop to your work, and a lot of people talk about a screenless world. I think the biggest impact is going to be a keyboardless world. Big impact on me because I spent so long learning how to touch type. That's going to waste a skill. So what it is you set up the skill, and so you might go, well, this is my morning routine. So I want to hear the weather. I want a travel update for my journey, rather than waiting for when it comes on the radio.
Yeah.
I want one done, and I want to get my favorite song maybe to wake me up. Then I want the news headlines from, I like ABC in America, so I want their news headlines. And then for my commute, I want to get like something that I enjoy. So I might choose, for example, a light-hearted satirical comedy football show like On the Left Side.
Yeah, which we'll get to.
Yeah. So, and then what you do is you program it, and then literally you either just turn to your smart device and say, play my flash briefing, or you program it to do that as your alarm.
Right.
And so then it goes off, and then so that it will automatically run through that list and bring up the next thing.
Right.
Now, what they do as part of the Sports Social is that within that skill, they create and again, it's the leading the way with this. It's the only human-read live update for all 20 Premier League teams as well. Right. And so whatever your team is, and potentially that's going to expand. So you could say to it, it will give you that briefing, or you can come in. I say you've been out shopping or you've been at the cinema while the football's been on, and you come back in, and to the point where you don't have to say what was the score in the West Ham game, you just go, Alexa, how did we do? And because Alexa already knows that that's your team or whatever, and then you get somebody like me reading out these briefings. And
all right,
yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah,
I knew what they were, but I didn't quite know how they were used.
Yeah, so it's really interesting and exciting way of moving forward. There's some very interesting things happening. We're going to start seeing more entertainment products. I know that there's even game shows are going to start coming through Alexa. So you'll be able to enter the game show by answering questions on it, and then you'll appear on the game show so you can hear. Yeah,
crazy. It's just opened up a whole new world of possibilities, isn't it?
And that's the thing. It's exciting, and I kind of know about that about as much as most people know about podcasting, but I know lots about podcasting.
You know a lot.
I think.
When you did Podcast Movement, how many times have you spoken there?
I've spoken there the last 2 years, but I've been going for 3 years.
And what have you spoken about specifically? Same each time, or?
Variations on it. So one of the many podcasts I've got a list here, many podcasts I make on a regular basis is called Pod From Nothing. And that is a completely different show every time. And so I was wondering if we could maybe do that here, but it's maybe not the right format for it. It's a keynote speech that I give where it's aimed at people that have never podcasted.
Right.
And I'm probably going to do a version of this in the breakout sessions at Pods Up North. And so what we do is we start by going, obviously this is for people who haven't made a podcast. Why haven't you made a podcast? And generally the reasons that come back is time, equipment, knowledge and skill, not knowing what to talk about, yeah, and also insecurities about how the voice sounds.
Yeah,
nobody's going to listen to me. Nobody's interested. And then what I do is over the next 20 minutes, I systematically destroy all those things by actually creating this podcast from scratch with the people in the room, using only what equipment they've got in the room, using the skills of the people that we've got in the room, which is usually zero skills. No offense to anybody. and we make a show. And if you want to listen to and get an example of the kind of stuff we do, go and have a listen to Pod from Nothing. There's usually, depends how often I do
Pod
it.
from Nothing.
Yeah, on the notes.
We'll put it in the show notes.
And that varies in topics from ice cream, where people just scream their favourite flavour of ice cream down the microphone, to post-coital cuisine, which was an interview show about the foods that people like to eat after having sex. And these are all generated by the room. It's a little bit like Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah.
And actually it's a proof of concept, but the way I do it is I kind of go, you know what, I'm just conducting this, you generate it yourself. The one I just did in America this time, I think it's called Foods That Feed the Mind. It stopped me in my tracks, because one of the things you'll always hear people say is that podcastings are really intimate and they're really authentic and they're really honest. And what happened in that show, that recording, we had 3 people get up that have never made a podcast before. One was our sound engineer, recording into an iPad. He's never used the piece of software that we gave him, but it's just one button recording. Road Reporter, if you're looking for that on Apple, it's very simple, very easy. I said, all you got to do is press record and then press pause. That's it. And little tip for you, if you don't know how to edit, just plan out how you're going to do it and record it in exactly the order that you want to do it. And then we had, was it Christina and Frankie? And Christina said, can I ask the questions? I was like, sure, you're happy. And I'm not going to give it away, but while they were, well, it's only a 2-minute episode. That's all it was. So 3 questions, 2-minute episode. It stopped me in my tracks. In fact, the whole room held their breath at one moment because of what was revealed. And I was like, I could not have planned this. I could not have planned this better. Now, it doesn't always go that well, but then the idea is that not only do they do that, but then as soon as it's finished, while we wrap up, I upload it using Libsyn or whoever wants to sponsor me if nobody's doing it. And by the end of the session, so I've done all that within 20 minutes, 10 minutes for Q&As, and then all going to, well, the Wi-Fi signal's good enough, everybody's phone starts pinging.
Just put it out.
And people play it, and you get like a 21 iPhone salute of the podcast that you've just made.
Yeah.
And so that is, it just demystifies all the things, because what you'll find, like a lot of things in life, when it comes to podcasting, people don't get started because they have questions that they don't have answers to.
Yeah.
And your questions are valid. But 90% of the questions you're asking, you'll never need the answer to.
Yeah. I think people overthink things.
Oh, God.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I do exactly the same thing. I'm a real overthinker.
Yeah.
I'm a real overthinker. And, you know, I'm trying to move more, not so much move more into my heart and my emotion, my feelings, but just have like a two-way street and have communication between the two.
I think I was a bit more methodical. I spent a year sort of trial and error testing stuff first before we started recording some episodes.
Oh, you're not alone. You're not alone. There are people I've met at Podcast Movement that have been 4, 5, even 6 years in a row. And it's not, and they may live in America, but still to get there and have the hotel and all that, it's an expensive thing to do. They still haven't launched.
Wow.
No, but so it is funny, but also it just shows you like how people get intimidated and overwhelmed.
I said I'm going to take a year. I was going to plan to do it. I think we started in February 17. So at the beginning of 16, I had the idea for it, and I thought, well, how do you do it? So I started listening to podcasts about podcasting. Then I started buying the odd bit of equipment,
which is how we got to know each other.
So on Pod Tips, I started listening to you guys and started being on a couple of the episodes and did a few test episodes with some people in, which we didn't come out great. Canned them, but just kept. It's also just for like, how is it going to work? How many episodes? How often do we do these?
Yeah.
Initially we thought, we'll do one a week. It'll be easy. Like, no. So we come to twice a month. It's perfect for us. Gives you enough time to get guests sorted and sort of promote your last episode before you start your next episode, stuff like that. So it was about a year. We did about 5 in a row that were good. And then we went, right, let's just go. We just started.
What do you do when you've done one that's not good? So for example,
there was only a couple. It was more sort of maybe I didn't research the guest properly, or sort of where technical issues.
Yeah.
Like it was just little issues to iron out. But once I was always confident that I was going to be able to have good conversations. But it quickly taught me like I've got to have. I can't just have anybody. I can't just like. Obviously, at the beginning you start like your friends, people who you know. Yeah. And obviously, in the music industry, I knew quite a lot of people, but I also knew some people around here as well. Some guests worked, some guests didn't. So then I had to spend a bit more time going, what have they done? What have they got to say? How are they going to talk in in public, things like that. So it was just trial and error, which is why I'm glad we did it that way. Because then when we started, we had no problems. We just never missed a beat. That's it'll be 3 years in January.
This format has changed a lot as well.
Yes,
Like our first 10 episodes are so different to how it is now.
Yeah,
just by learning along the way.
Yeah,
but you know what the thing is, like you're completely allowed to do that, because guess what? You're not just the presenter. You're not just the tech operator of this show. You are the presenter. You're the producer. You're the CEO.
Yeah,
you're the owner of the network.
Mm.
And so, like, the only person that you need to ask permission from is yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we've rebranded, changed the logo. It used to be just people in the music industry because that's all I knew. But then gradually I started talking to people from all different walks of life, and it's just kind of grown from there. So that's part of the reason why we rebranded.
And the funny thing is because, like, people are people and you're just talking to people. It's actually not that. It's not a big change. It's not that different.
No. And there is a skill to it. There is a bit of a learning curve in terms of actually listening to what they're saying and not just worrying about what am I going to say next.
Yeah.
Because then if you're thinking about that, you're not listening to what they're saying.
The way I learnt about how to interview. So I did some tremendously bad interviews. So when I was working in radio, so I interviewed quite a few people of various levels. One of the last interviews I did in that role, in that life, was with The Enemy, which was brilliant. And that was amazing. Like, I was in Coventry at the time doing a breakfast show, and just to be sat around a table like them, and for them to come and play live, and just like drummer was playing with the brushes as well, and just the magic was there. I've sang in a tiny box. I've presented in a tiny box studio with a guitarist opposite me and Beverly Knight right next to me singing on the microphone because we don't have enough microphones. And I was like, "Do you need time to warm up?" She's like, "No." Bang, hit it. And I was just like kind of going, "This is amazing." I've also, I just interviewed famously, one of my favourite things, this is when I start to get really bad, interviewed McFly and consistently called them busted all the way through it. Not deliberately. If it had been deliberate, it would be funny. But after that, that's when McBusted came about. So
it's your fault then.
Potentially. But I did interview Ben Folds when it was Ben Folds 5 and Ash.
Cool.
Both bands. Like, Ben Folds was the first song I ever played on radio when I had my own radio show. Right. I played Underground by Ben Folds 5. And Ash was a band that, because my family's from Northern Ireland, a band that me and my brother really sort of identified with, and the connection with, like, the other song Kung Fu and the Jackie Chan film, and obviously their first album being 1977 and the secret track at the beginning being the TIE Fighter Come Past. It was like complete. So I met them, and it was around about 2000, 2001 when Charlotte Hathaway had joined them. Around the time they had Burn Baby Burn, that album.
98? Is that 97, 98?
No, it's going to be around 2000.
Was it?
Yeah, 2000, yeah, 2001. And so I went to see them while they were recording an album, and I was with them in the studio while they were recording an album.
Wow.
And I remember they had a PlayStation 2. I can't remember what the game was. And they were just finishing off some track. I said, "Yeah, we'll be another 20 minutes while we finish this." So I just sat and played PlayStation with Tim, which was cool. And I should have just recorded.
Yeah,
I should have just pressed record and did that.
That's a relaxed atmosphere,
exactly.
Isn't it?
But I was so green. So I did that and just chatted with them, had a great time. Then everyone came out of the studio. Went, "Great, okay, hit record." And then my mind went blank.
Ah, yeah. You missed your moment, hadn't you?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure... I think I deleted the mini disc. This is how long ago it was.
Mini disc.
But the way I remember it is my first and possibly my only question was, "What's it like to be Ash?"
Oh dear.
Anyway, two things I just put in terms of, like, when you're choosing your guests. So, first of all, like, it's very easy to get the wrong person on the show. It's very easy to get them, and that's always an awkward moment because you're like, "Oh, fuck." So
it's a learning curve.
It is a learning curve. Major technical error. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a warning. If they ever tell you that you've had a major technical error and they couldn't do the show, and they don't book you in straight away, it's because you're an awful guest, right? But something that will really help you is identify your why of the show. So not just because what will happen is you'll get to that point and go, "Damn, we've got a show next week. We've got no one on. Get that bloke out to come on instead." And he's not necessarily going to be the right person for the show.
Yeah.
So if you know what the show's about and what fulfills, then it becomes its own filter and it just gets rid of everything else.
Yeah.
And then when somebody comes up and says, "I'll come and do the show," and you can legitimately go to them, no.
Yeah. That's kind of where we're at now. Part of the reason why we rebranded as well is to change the logo, but change the format slightly and the recording schedule, because I decided at the beginning that we're going to do the first Monday and the third Monday of every month.
Right.
So that's 2 weeks apart.
Yeah.
So give you a chance to do the work between each week. But then we get to the point where, well, what happens if you can't get a guest for that deadline that you set yourself? So now we just do whenever a guest is available, we book them in, we do it. If that's a Tuesday, it's a Tuesday. We used to do it, regimentally make sure it comes out every other Monday. But now I book a guest, whatever day it is, and then it'll go out the next day.
Now, the thing is, you can get to a stage where you are Jonathan Ross, and if you want to be on Jonathan Ross's show on the Friday, you've got to go and film it on the Wednesday.
Yeah.
At that level. But up until that point, have a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make a big difference. And what I really like about what you guys do is that you do it live and on location, and I think there's a different energy when you're in the same room with someone. Even though there's like a big table in between us,
it's still the same as we put the pub, just fine.
It's just there. I can probably hear you better than the pub actually because I've got the headphones on. Now that would be an interesting thing with the pub. The show the last hour might not be as good as the start of it though.
It's always difficult to do shows in noisy places.
Yeah, but the question thing. So when I was I learned terribly from those interviews with Ash. I then spent 3 years hosting my own show on a cruise ship.
I did see this.
Yeah. So because you saw my Facebook.
I looked at your list of previous jobs.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So I spent 3 years as a DJ on a cruise ship, and part of it was I did TV and a radio show, and basically there I'd come from a world of commercial radio where everything was scrutinized and monitored, and it was like after each show they'd sit down and they'd analyze what you've done, and that was like it was micromanaging.
Stifling.
And it's not like that everywhere. It's just at this particular stage I had, for various reasons, that was happening. And I did have some very good examples of how to do that better. But then when I went to work at sea, it was almost like going back to my very roots. So we had a very basic setup. It was like 2 microphones, 2 turntables, CD player and a mixer. And also I just had a time slot to fill. And as long as I turned up, did something, didn't upset anybody, nobody cared. Nobody listened. No, it was just like if they got a phone call to say your DJ said something or there's no DJ on, then they get in trouble. If I turned up and did it, nobody cared. It was like John Peel. John Peel was able to do what he did because for 3 years nobody listened to what he was doing. And then when they tried and pulled him out, there was an uproar and he came out. And while I was doing that, I learned that I needed to fill things up, and I would often interview different members of the ship's crew. And very quickly learned that the art to an interview is not the question. I always thought it was a great question. You come up with a great question, you come up with a really clever thing that you research, and you can do that.
That's part of it.
It is part of it. But then sometimes you can come up with this great question and you kind of go, I noticed you did this and you did that. Does this mean that you're going to go out? And they go, no.
Yeah.
And then you're
Leading
fucked because
questions.
you've got... right. And so the trick is to listen.
Yeah.
The trick, like you just said there, you've nailed it right there. The trick is to listen and then have the bravery to not say anything.
Yeah, dead air.
Yeah, to be quiet, to let them talk. Conversely, there's also another type of bravery to be able to interrupt and go back to something that they've glossed over.
Yeah.
And say, you just said that thing there. Where did you just say you learned to walk again? Oh yeah, I did it. No, what?
Yeah, that leads you down a whole another.
Exactly. And I've done that with someone, and it was one of my favorite interviews ever.
Yeah, because you might miss some gold there.
Yeah, and the thing is, what you've got to realize, like to most people, like everything that you've done in your life is boring because it's your life and you've lived it. But for other people, they're like, oh my God. I mean, even though we all breathe the same air and we all go to the toilet and sleep in the bed and all those different things, we all have the same needs. Like we all live slightly different paths. And though you might be listening to this kind of going, oh, my life's really boring. I just say, so what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I fly. What do they call it? I did it in Nepal last year. Paragliding. I'm a paragliding. I just do paragliding all day. I'm like, oh my God, I've done that once, and it's the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
Now I imagine like any job, it can get a bit mundane, but still, wow.
And most things, if you've done it a lot, you're gonna have some stories.
Yeah, exactly.
People
it's
love
just
stories
outside of your realm of experience, and that's where podcasting comes in because you can tell stories. As you might have noticed, I've told a few. and there's more to come.
Yeah, but it's this kind of level of conversation which is not it's not happening as much as it used to. I don't think in general with like phones and distractions. I don't think people are sitting down and talking one to one as much as they used to.
I am sort of torn a little bit with this, because even by doing this right now, what we're doing is we're adding more noise to the internet. We're adding more conversation. We're adding more distraction. And like, if anybody ever borrows my phone or I take a screenshot, they get freaked out by the number of notifications that I've got on it. And I think that affects a lot of us. Some of us can't handle that.
I've disabled mine.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. And there's so many demands placed on our time. Once you step aside your family, your relationship, and your basic needs of like eating, sleeping, all those kinds of things, you've got a small window of time. You know, you might only have 3 hours a day, right? One of those hours might be when you're commuting. Very few people take time to just be by themselves and be quiet. And then the likes of you and me come along and go, I've made another 2-hour show, listen to this. And it does build pressure and demand. And so something I would say to anybody that is a podcaster, is a content producer, is like really value anybody that listens to your show. Like really fucking value them, because, you know,
whether you've got 10 or 10,000.
Yeah. The fact is that they could have spent that time listening to somebody else or watching something else or doing something else. Now they may be doing it while they're in the bathroom. They may be listening while they're doing the dishes or doing the garden or running or whatever. They're listening. And the fact that they're listening to you is amazing. Like the people listening now, like, you have the whole of the internet at your fingertips, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening to the podcast.
Think how many other things they could be doing.
Yeah, and how many great TED Talks there are out there.
Yeah.
How many historical documentaries there are. You could be learning something. You could be doing that. You're spending your time doing this, which is a testament to you and the connection that you've built with your audience, right? And also to, like, somebody thinks, what's this bloke about?
But I can't remember who said it. You know Dave Jackson?
Yes, from the School of Podcasting.
Yeah. I remember him saying on one of his episodes, think of each episode as an advert to a new listener.
Yeah.
Because I've seen some podcasts where they just jump in and, like, they don't say, hello, welcome to such and such. On this show, we do such and such. Like, I always try and I do that at the beginning of the show, but I was just trying to give a little intro, and especially about the guests and stuff, just so people know what they're expecting. And I always think, I think that's a good mentality to have. Each episode, you have potential new listeners. Don't assume everyone knows what, like, private jokes, inside jokes.
Yeah.
Don't assume everyone knows what you're about.
But then at the same time, and I know Dave, and I think he's great and he's wonderful. That's an opinion, and there's no set rules.
No.
And I would counter that with something like the OA. Was it on Netflix, where they launched a series? I've not managed to see it yet, but it sounds like it's brilliant. So I think the first and only time they do the theme music and the intro for the show is 53 minutes into the first episode.
Right.
And then they don't show the credits until the end of the last episode.
Right.
Because they know that people will binge it.
That's a good thing. Yeah, it's interesting.
And so from the point of view, like, if you've got people that will always listen to your show, your core audience, they always come back to you, you know, are they just going to skip over your intro because they know what you're saying?
Yeah. Quite possibly, yeah.
So then that you need to think about how you do your intro. You give them something at the beginning that means they're in the same way that Marvel have done this brilliantly. So if you go and see a Marvel film now, what do you do that you never did before? At the end of the movie.
What, you never did before?
Well, you stay until after the credits.
Yeah.
To see.
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm not into Marvel.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Well,
I know. I get what you mean. Yeah, they're known for stuff happening after.
And so what they'll do now is they'll have, in fact, the later films anyway. I'm not sure about the early ones, but they have 2 breaks in it. So they have like the credits with all the graphics, and then they'll do a little cutscene, and then they'll do the white letters on the black background scrolling credits, and then there'll be another scene at the end.
Right.
And people stay because they know something's happening there. People will stay, and they've actually changed people's behaviours, and that moves on to people will take that into other movies as well.
Yeah.
Now there may be a knock-on effect of now people suddenly sort of go, oh, weren't you the third AD grip on that film because they've stayed and watched the credits, which they never knew before, or you know.
Yeah.
But that's changed it. So and people can skip. That's the thing with podcasts. Remember, they can skip through.
For me personally, I am like that. If I could discover a new podcast, I do like at the beginning to say this is a such and such show. This is what we do.
Yep.
I prefer that. So
Sure.
that's what I do on
Yeah,
my show.
completely.
There's no right or wrong way to do it. And I keep it short,
Yeah.
so people don't get he's rambling on. Get
And,
to the
and
point.
then the thing is, as things move now, people don't necessarily listen to it all in one go. They'll listen to one
Yeah.
show and maybe
commuters
do it
in
listen
bits.
to the next thing. Like, and to be honest, especially when you're doing shows that can be an hour and a half each episode,
Well, some of ours are 3 hours.
yeah,
Like this is probably going to be.
people aren't going to listen to the whole thing
No.
in one sitting. Never mind this. Now, some people might. It depends what your audience is. Depends what you're going for.
Yeah.
But the kind of the cool thing about this is you don't know who's listening. One of the shows that I work on, I've forgotten to put on my list as well. One of the shows.
He's got too many.
Yeah. So back to Coventry. So one of my best friends, Mick Tully, who is my martial arts instructor, he weirdly, the very first time I ever spoke to him, I have a record of it, and it was back in 2006. And he was the first person to call me on my breakfast show that I was doing. And he'd obviously annoyed the crap out of the previous host because when the phone flashed, they put in Mad Mick Tully, talks forever but good value. And as I say, Mick's a martial arts instructor. He became my instructor, and we make a show together called Mick's Martial Arts. And what was the point of telling that? Too many different things.
It was just the other show. You were just talking about the show.
Yeah, I just liked stories. So this is it. I need more coffee.
Something just reminded you. I can't remember what it was. What made you write that down?
Cut.
We don't do cutting on here.
No, I know.
It's fine.
No, but that's because the thing is, people do this.
Yeah, but this is real life. This is real life. It happens.
And you do that thing and I've reached that age where I go upstairs and I go, why did I come upstairs for? As
Yeah,
my friend did.
As we all do.
My friend went down to London. He started doing a show down there. Got to London and realised he'd left the keys to the flat in Manchester. So I had to get the train back.
It's all about being here. It'll come back to you.
It'll come back. It's fine.
Well, the other thing we'll go back to is music in podcasts.
Yes.
There's always been this myth about fair use and all
so
that.
let me tell you about this. There's a guy called Cliff Lewitt who's a podcasting legal guy. I run a legal podcast as well called
What are we up to now? 7?
that's Mondeo Law. We haven't got to copyright. Yeah,
I've heard of that.
we haven't got to. Now, when I say I run that, let me clarify this. So Alex Boardman is a stand-up comedian with a law degree, and Chris Keogh is a criminal barrister.
Alex Boardman at the Comedy Store in Manchester.
Yes.
Yeah, I've spoke to him about coming on here.
Oh right.
But, he's a very busy man.
He is
so
a very
I don't
busy
know
man,
if
but
it'll
he
happen.
sometimes does gigs up here. So me and Alex, all last season, we did a football show together because he's a United fan, I'm a City fan, right? So Alex had this idea for a show. He spoke to me about it, and him and Chris did a demo, and they came to me about it, and they recorded it in upstairs of a pub, and there were some good things there, and it had the bones of it. It was a really good idea. But then their basic idea was that criminal law, when you look at the summation of it, is very dry and it's very dull, and it's like, oh. But because they're comedians, they were like, we can have a laugh with this, we can do some things. Now, one of the issues that we stumbled across was the fact that I was like, why are you recording in this big empty room? It's like, well, I've got dogs and Keogh's got young kids, and so we struggle for time anyway, and so if we get time, we don't know that we're going to be able to record in each other's houses. So I was like, oh, okay. What car do you drive? And it just so happened that at the time, Chris had a Mondeo. Alex might have even had a Mondeo as well. I think he's got a Fiesta now. Not important. And I said, because, cars are soundproof to a large extent, to cut out a lot of the noise of road, a lot of the engine noise. As long as it's not raining, it's a pretty soundproof environment in. Not completely soundproof. Little tip for you. If you're doing a long drive, pop earplugs in. You're less tired, especially if you're gigging. You're gigging like earplugs because you're processing so much noise in your brain gets tired. So earphones cut that out. Anyway.
So maybe if you're driving late back.
Yeah, rather than listen to a podcast. Just stick some earplugs in. That's the wrong advert to do for podcasts, isn't it? So I said to them, so do it in the car. You got a Mondeo. And I went, well, there's the show. So like... is it Rodeo Law in America, like famous thing? So we came up with this idea, Mondeo Law, and that's the show. And so I'm credited as being the producer. Technically, I'm what they would call a showrunner in America, and that I kind of helped create it. They do all the work.
Yeah.
But Alex and Chris are really gracious in that I help them set it up and get it going. And but now Alex does all the producing and the editing on it. At the minute, unfortunately, because of the work that Chris is doing as a barrister, he's called away a lot in London a lot. So the first series is mostly recorded in a car. Recent episodes, mostly Chris is on the phone, just because of the practicalities of what they're doing. If you're studying law, if you know somebody that's going off and wants to study law, whether it's at A-level university, listen to that show, because I tell you what, I could defend myself in court now. And honestly, mens rea, evidence, all that kind of stuff, I get it now. I understand it and haven't realised it. And so we kind of stumbled across a format there of a kind of edutainment in that it is fun. And the thing is, it's like some of it is so puerile in that Alex will always laugh at the name of the judges, right?
Right,
Yeah, so they're like Judge Randy, right? Oh, those kind of things. But they, and the funny thing is some of the judges that come up, Chris will have been in front of. Right, and then they'll go, he's a good judge because he ruled in my favour. Right? And it again is this weird thing that wouldn't happen normally. But yeah, so that's one of the shows that I do.
Music in
Yes.
podcasts.
So music in podcasts, you'll often hear people saying, "Well, fair use." Okay, it needs sorting it out. We're close to something happening in America that's not going to apply here, which I'll come on to in a second. But just, this is what you need to know. So fair use is a defense. It is not a law. So if you...
We're talking about using commercial music in a podcast.
So any... So if you create a piece of music, you own the copyright on it. There's the recent issue.
That's why all the music in my podcast is my own music.
Perfect, right? So you own all the rights to that.
Yeah.
Interesting thing is, have you ever published that music anywhere?
No.
No.
But I do own the publishing rights to it.
You do own the publishing rights. Yeah. Great. So because if you gave it to a company to like handle and distribute that for you, and they put it on iTunes or whatever it is now, or put it out there, and then you were using it on the podcast, you could get a bill for it, and you could you could actually be taken to court for it.
When I started this, the record deal had just expired, so we got all the music rights that we'd done with them back to us. It took a while to get it all sorted, but we own it all now. So.
Yeah. So what happens is I've had a couple of meetings with like over in the UK, you have PRS and PPL. Basically, the main problem with this is up until 2000. 99, 2000, music was very easy to manage, right? It was all physical and it was all regional. Then the internet came and, in some people's views, liberated music. Box. Yeah. And for other people's views, fucked up the golden goose that gave them the eggs. Yeah. And so what you have now is you have, in some ways, a dinosaur of an industry trying to adapt to what's going on. Now, iTunes worked because they came along and they made it easier to pay for music legally and quicker and faster and better quality than it was to actually sort of download illegally. Now we're moving to the stage where everybody's streaming and the likes of Spotify, which has had a really negative effect in some ways for the musicians, but a really positive effect for the fans, because it means that musicians are touring more now.
It works both ways.
Right. People are still selling physical stuff. I know when you were talking to one of your previous guests on the show,
Lords of Ruin, the last one.
It might have been those when you talked about how like people like to have like the memento of the gig.
Well, yeah, that's me included. I've bought CDs with no intention to listen to it just because they're selling it, and it's a way to support them.
I was there.
Then I'll just go home and listen to them on Spotify.
Yeah, it's that crazy thing. But then you kind of go, this will be worth loads because it's unpaid.
Yeah.
But so that's moved, and what you have is this issue where people want to use music. Now, I'm quite liberal in my beliefs, and I think you should have that. But I also think that people should be recognised and paid for what they do.
Yeah.
The problem that you've got is that because music was done regionally, all the rights were done regionally. And what's happened now with podcasts is you've gone international. So even if PRS and PPL came up with a license here, and they did have a license a few years ago, a podcast license that was released. The problem with it was there was like 3 states in America and also 2 or 3 different countries which wouldn't recognize it. So you then get into a very similar minefield, which is a bit like you might have heard the tax laws. So if you buy something off Amazon Germany, right, and you're in the UK and Amazon's, the invoice comes from Ireland, where's the tax paid on that issue? Who, all those, and it's the same thing with the rights. Now, because you've got platforms like YouTube and podcast platforms where people are uploading things now, they can't control who's putting what onto it because they open it up for people to put stuff on there. But what you'll notice is videos get pulled all the time. And the reason for that is I've had off the record interviews with certain companies, and I can't name who they are because they wouldn't go on the record with me. But what they would like is they'd like a situation where rather than you or me as a podcaster paid the rights, the platforms paid the rights. Now, that makes sense because it's easier for them to manage because they're only working with maybe 100 different platforms. Yeah. So you like YouTube, your Libsyns, your whatever it is.
Yeah.
So they have a blanket license that covers everything, all that varies depending on what's going on. Problem is that you can't control, like, if suddenly like we all decide to play Elvis songs on our podcasts, you know, that's a lot more money going out to Elvis than they've maybe budgeted for or whatever. And so what they do is they'll just remove the songs. They'll remove those videos that have got licensed music on. Now, I've had a few run-ins with that myself. I've done great episodes of podcasts, and they've been pulled because of that.
Is this like a video on YouTube?
Not a video. I've had that with podcast as well, which I think I've hit that issue as well. You're never quite sure because you don't always get a message to tell you that's why. It just disappears. Which is really frustrating, especially when you put a lot of work.
There's a lot of that on YouTube as well, with the video side of it. It's a complete minefield.
So what you have now is, so I know Red Bull are doing something now, which is not for corporate, but for like they have a library of music for using on videos. If you're doing videos, you pay for that as a subscription. There's the whole majority of Audio Jungle, all these different things that do that. But even then, all the different licenses are really complicated and don't make sense. What it needs to do is you need to get to something which is like Netflix. You pay $9.99 a month and you can use all this music. Podcastmusic.com, I think that's right. I'm doing it off the top of my head. I'm not wearing their glasses today. But they had a stall, and basically they have signed rights. And by the end of this year, the beginning of next year, basically everybody within there, which includes commercial music, you'll be able to use their music in your podcast.
Yeah.
As long as you're paying the $10 a month. However, it's been done by the Americans with a view in the American market. So the caveat is American-based podcasts.
Right.
So
that means they're recorded in America.
Well, here's the issue. Now, you mentioned you're using Libsyn.
Yeah.
Now, Libsyn is a podcast platform based in America. So you could argue that because it's coming out of Libsyn, it's an American-based podcast.
I'm uploading it to American servers.
Yeah. But then the thing so this is the territorial hangover is still there. We're getting really close to it. We're still not there. Somebody's going to come along, and when we basically do what iTunes did for illegal downloads. Somebody does that because really, at the end of the day, what you want is something that allows you to make your podcast sound great.
Yeah.
But also something that actually respects and honors the people that have made the music. Now the fair use thing, just to clarify on that, fair use is a defense. It's not a license. Now, you can legitimately claim fair use, but you can only do that
if you got sued for playing 5 seconds of a song or something like that.
Yeah. But what would likely happen is you would just have to take the episode down.
Yeah.
If you wanted to keep that up there or get it back up, you would have to go to court because you could only use that defense in court. You can't use it before. It's not a license. So most people that are making a podcast do not have the funds to do that because the legal system in most countries is set up that you've got to have a lot of money to get to court.
You're right, though. I think it is going to be like a subscription sort of thing. You play whatever you want because there's no way, like, say a podcast played a song, commercial song, and it got 1 million downloads. You know, if a song got 1 million plays on a radio, they would all be picked up and recognised, and the artist would be compensated for it, and everyone who wrote it and produced it, and who owns the publishing. But that doesn't happen in podcasting. So the only way, you're right, the only way they can do it is if everyone's paying a subscription and it gets divvied out.
And that's divided. And maybe part of the rules of that subscription is that you have to make better notes, and you have to conform to the standards, so that you
I
say
could see that.
what the song is that you put
It
in
has
there.
to. It's like on YouTube. YouTube's got a bit better than that.
Yeah.
Where, like all these reaction videos.
Sure.
They put link to the original video down in the description, and they copyright and all. They put
Yeah.
all that. I think it could be the same in podcasting.
The negative side of this is, so your show here is using your music. It's it's showing off what you do as an individual, as a musician, as what you've done. To use a comparison to football, if you suddenly allowed to have all the big names in, like your Neymars, your Ronaldos, your Agueros all playing, then where does your Mark from Cumbria, how does he get into the tide? Yeah?
Yeah.
Because you're not the glamorous. And so there's possibly a negative side, a double-edged sword of it, in terms of that coming through. Now, there's a lot of stuff out there through using Creative Commons, which allows you to use their music in as long as you credit it.
I'd say at the moment a lot of people just do that. They just go to a site and get free music, or there's services that say what you want and they'll create it for you.
Yeah. I would say that there's certain things that you go out and I'll listen to podcasts now and I'll know exactly where they've got their music from.
Yeah.
And I'll also be like, should I tell them that that's no longer licensed for podcast use?
Yeah.
Because
pod safe.
Yeah. So that's the problem as well. It's like, depending when you've downloaded it to use that music again. So somebody creates a piece of music, puts it out there, it's for free to download, and then later puts a caveat saying you can't use this for podcasts, right?
Somebody already has for the past 2 years.
But if you've already used it and taken it, then the argument is, well, can I continue to use it? And the problem is none of these cases have got to court. And what has to happen is they kind of need to be there, or there needs to be an agreement to sort that out. It's a real minefield. What I would say to you is, if you know somebody that makes their own music, get them to do something specific for you. Exactly. Because then what's going to happen is, and it's worth it. You might pay someone. I mean, how much would it cost me to pay you to make a theme tune for me? If you ever was going to say
50 quid.
50, right? Perfect. Now that 50 quid, you might at first go, come on, I can just find a piece of music for free. But if I'm going to get a bespoke piece of music made for me by you, I can have a couple of different versions of it, like 10 seconds, a minute, a full song, whatever. And then that is my piece of music that I can have on my podcast, that I can have if I'm doing a live show somewhere, like it's my walkout music as I go out, right? I can have it as my ringtone. I can play it when I turn up on a date, whatever that would be, right? Because it's my theme tune. I own that, and no one else can have that. Whereas if you go down the commercial route, you're going to have 50, 100, 2,000 different podcasts that will all start with Blur's song too.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, if they opened the doors to say we can use whatever song you want, there would be a lot of people using the same stuff.
So it's just be interesting to see where it goes.
I suppose the main people who would want to do it are people who have podcasts about songs, who want to dissect songs and play songs.
Now, you just hit along what I think is one of the best podcasts out there.
Song Exploder.
Yeah. Now, partly because I'm thinking who the fuck are you to get the access that you get?
Yeah.
And the stuff. If you don't know this song, the guy, and forgive me because he's got an unusual name, I can't quite remember it. The guy that does the show has the most incredible access to artists and songs. You scroll down that list of the episodes and you look at the show, the artists that you got.
Yeah,
it's amazing. And it goes everywhere from bands that you've never heard of to like giants like U2.
Metallica was on one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was thinking, I actually never questioned it. Like, how are these guys able to play all this music?
And so what actually happens in the show is they talk about a band and a song, and they don't just play the song, they talk about how that song was created.
Yeah.
And quite often what you'll hear demo versions of it, or maybe the initial riff. Then you'll hear them talking about the lyrics, and they've got time with these the bands, the individuals from the bands, the record label, whatever influenced it. And then at the end of the show, you get the song. You get to hear the whole song, which is often an album track or a B-side, but sometimes it's a big hit.
Yeah.
And the whole problem, the reason we're in such a problem with music rights in podcasting is because of the word download. Language is so powerful in every aspect of life, but within podcasting it creates massive problems because the record labels heard download because at the time you had to download the podcast, right? And they were like, well, you're downloading my song, you can't have it. And actually, really, it falls into the category of taping songs off the radio.
Yeah, that's true.
That's kind of where it goes in, which the music industry turned their nose up at, but never really invested
Yeah.
in, never chased up.
I was thinking about this the other day. All mobile phone networks are going unlimited data.
Yep.
So eventually, you'll just stream. There's no need to download.
Yeah.
So that's gone. Could be gone.
But then that in itself moves us into a different thing. There's
Is it a download or is it a stream?
well, no, it's not about that, because what you're actually doing is you're accidentally moving into a world of gatekeepers then. Because there's a couple of accounts on Twitter that run campaigns to get songs added to the likes of Spotify, and because it's not so the thing is, you assume that because things like Spotify exist or Deezer or whatever you use, every song is there, but it's not.
No.
It's not.
It all depends on who owns the music.
Yeah. Just off the top of my head, KLF. Yeah. Quite difficult to get hold of them on different things.
Well, I mean, for the first few years, AC/DC wasn't on there. Metallica wasn't on there until 2012.
Also, you've had things where people have pulled out of it and launched their own, like Taylor Swift pulled out.
Oh, yeah.
Then
Kanye
Dr.
West
Dre launched
tried-
his own
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and all these different things happened. And again, that's like we mentioned earlier with like the likes of having to have Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon Prime. To listen to your music, it's not just one thing. You're going to have to have all these different services, which again, I'm like, it's an art, not a commodity. But then there's a business
both.
around it. Yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah, it's complicated. And I don't know, the music side of it, I think, yeah, you're right. Something has been agreed, hasn't it, for next year in America?
Apparently. Yeah, so it's evolving.
Which could set a precedent, I suppose.
Yeah. Basically, what it means is something to come along and to do it well, and then everyone else will fall in. That's what will happen. It's a lot of politics that comes into it. It's just because because if you look at now, it has started to shift, but it's moving slowly. So you look at like VHS and DVD; they were all certain regions, right? So you had VHS and PAL, it was VHS, but you had PAL and NTFT, was it, or something like
NTFC?
NTFC,
Yeah.
and then you had Region 1, Region 2, Region 3 for your DVDs, right? And now let's be completely honest. That was about control.
It was.
That was about control, right? Blu-ray came along, and I was like, "Oh, I'm in America. I can buy a PlayStation game and take it on play it on my PlayStation 3, which you couldn't do before because it was a different region." So Blu-ray changed all that.
Yeah.
I think the thing is, though, we're moving to streaming. It's great, but the problem is to just be aware that you're introducing a different gatekeeper and a curator. Not everything's going to be there, not everything's up on YouTube.
No.
Not everything's out there. Not everything's on iTunes.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. Going back to what you're saying about people getting pulled off YouTube and stuff. You know what the biggest podcast in the world is?
There's a question. Joe Rogan serial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rogan.
Okay. Yeah.
They don't do live anymore.
Right.
Because they kept pulling stuff up on YouTube in the middle of the episode and getting flagged and getting taken down. So now they record it like this, then it goes straight out afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's almost live, but not.
Yeah.
That was just a few months ago that happened.
It's
So if the biggest podcast in the world is struggling with that,
yeah, and you know what? That's a great example of a couple of things that we've talked about. One, deep dive in an interview, like I really like what he gets out of the people that's on there. If you can put the time in, you really get to understand people and what they're talking about. But also, sorry, Joe, but I always skip the first 5 minutes.
well, just adverts, aren't
Yeah,
they? Just commercials.
it's just
I think we all do.
commercial.
I think we all do.
Now, there's an interesting thing on that is there's a lot of people that have come over to podcasting and gone, it's a bit like radio, so they do it the way they do radio.
Yeah.
So anybody that has a podcast that has advertising on it, you'll hear these terms: pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll.
Yeah.
And that comes from
Host
the sort of
reads.
things. Yeah, and host reads as well. But you know what? The thing is, you're following. Host reads are different, but the pre-roll, post-roll, mid-roll are like following the same format as we see on TV and radio. Middle of the show, end of the show, all those ad breaks. It's like, why do we have to do it like that? One of my favourite podcasts ever. It's on a joint channel now. Look up for, if you've not heard it, Panoply. They made.
Americans call it Panoply.
Panoply. They made The Message and Life After, right? And The Message was the first one they did, and it's actually made by General Electric Theatre, I think it was, and it's the story about Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, where that went out and people like supposedly went crazy and were going to kill their children because they thought aliens were invading. That show the message, and yet you just if you just go on and look for the message, you'll likely find 100 different like religious podcasts. But if you look for the message / life after, you'll find it. And the season they followed it after was about a messaging app called Life After. The message is actually a branded podcast, but there's no adverts in it.
Right. How does that work?
There is something that is mentioned about 3 or 4 times over the 10 or 12 episodes, which is a plot device, which actually is
like product placement type thing.
It's almost like product placement.
Audio product placement.
Audio product placement. But it's
interesting.
But it's like
so if he was telling a story, then I went and got a Coca-Cola.
Yeah, but it's not that blatant.
No.
Yeah?
But yeah,
it's more like, and then he stabbed him in the head with that Coca-Cola bottle.
a Stanley knife.
Yeah, I don't want to give the plot here, but I love that. I love that because of that. So if you listen to it and it's like, what is it? And then even at the end they don't make a big deal. And it was about raising awareness of this medical device or this medical thing that they've got. And the actual, I think the doctor they reference in may even be a real doctor that they reference in the show.
I don't like mid-roll. I don't like breaks in the conversation. It really bugs me.
But having said that, if you look at the figures, Edison Research are just so hot on this and so good.
I look how he's got an answer for everything. It's brilliant.
So
brilliant.
You look at like Super Bowl, like you can pay millions to, like, is it 5 million to have an advert of the Super Bowl?
Yeah, halftime. Yeah.
The penetration that you get, obviously you've got like 1 billion people watch that, whatever the number is. And similarly with Formula One, I think the formula they use for the formula for Formula One is they take per square inch of the size of the logo you have on the car and then multiply it by the global audience, and that's the dollar figure that you pay for that.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And that might even be per race, and then they put it up. So
wow.
Those are the 2 most expensive things that you advertise on. You know, Formula One cars and the Super Bowl. When they've done the research on this, the recall, retention, and activation of those adverts, right? And this goes across cinema, it goes across TV, it goes across printed media and radio. You're looking at anywhere between 8% and maybe 40%. So that's in terms of people go, I remember seeing this advert. Oh, I want to check that out. I want to do something with that. Right. And some of that's down to how good the advert is, how it engages with people. Podcasts, particularly with host-read material, the same figures that Edison have done, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, and I may be slightly out here, but the difference is significant. So you're looking at around 80% when it comes to... I've made some cases I remember seeing 85% of people.
So like the effectiveness of the commercial.
And so you can have. So I'll give you an example. So Mixed Martial Arts, I mentioned that before, the podcast we do, which is about to come back. We've had a bit of a break with that. We had a sponsor for that for a little while, even though at the time the audience for that show was about 200 people per episode in the first week of release. And if you went to Acast or someone like that, they were like, well, no, you've got to have 10,000 listeners. And then even when you get 10,000 listeners, like the value per listener is tiny. We sold a sponsor for that was about, we were getting about 50p per listener at one stage. And the reason for that was because everybody that listened to that show was a martial artist or a martial arts instructor or somebody that did martial arts and had an interest of it. And the sponsor was a martial arts supply shop online. And interestingly, they reckon they doubled their sales during the period they were involved with us. Now, I actually think that there was a second thing that happened there, in that because they couldn't afford to be on traditional advertising and media, they got as excited as if they were on traditional media. And so they did a lot of the social media for us because they kept retweeting, going, "Have you heard our advert? Have you heard the show? How do you think?"
Right.
Yeah. So it built it up,
and it helped each other.
Yeah, it helped each other. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So there's a different way, and there's another example as well. I'm trying to remember who I heard talking about this, but there's a podcast in America for chameleons, and like as in the lizards, iguanas. I think they call them slightly different, and I think there's only about 10,000 registered owners of these things in America, and that podcast has 10,000 listeners. Now, you're not going to listen to it if you don't if you don't have
niche.
one. Yeah, it's very niche. And one of the things that the guy did was he started making his own cages for the lizards because there was only a small proportion of Americans that had them. No pet shop stocked cages for them. So the cages were either too small or you would get these big ones imported that weren't strong enough. So he started making his own cages for them and advertised them on the show and had to stop making the podcast because he couldn't keep up with the demand of the thing. So, and that's the level of engagement that you have. Now, that's an anecdotal story, both of those.
Yeah.
But there is something about that connection.
Do you agree that the advertising should match up with the podcast?
See, now, you put it into my shoes. If you suddenly come and go and give here's a bag of money.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
I
But
haven't
I
had that.
meant from the podcast of like the view of you valuing your listeners, not want to just shove any old product in their face just because you're going to make some money
it
from
depends. Like if I think
Like I hate it on TV when
but
adverts
people are
irrelevant.
savvy. People are really savvy these days. People know, and that's why people skip the adverts because that's them when they go and have a cup of tea. And I think if you just honestly get, hey, look, this show, it takes a lot for us to do this, to set it up, to get it going, and we couldn't do it without the help of these guys.
Yeah.
And so do us a favor and just go and check out just hit the link in the notes. Have a look at it. It's not your thing. It's not your thing. But if you want to, traditional thing, if you want to build a website while lying on a foam mattress, right? Then do this.
Yeah.
I have to say that the best one is the best advert I've ever heard. Well, there's two versions of it in comedy podcasts. So Dexter Guff is Smarter Than You. Have you heard that one?
No.
And A Very Perfect Murder.
Nope.
So A Very Perfect Murder, I think that's the right name, is by The Onion. And so basically this guy wants to create the best murder podcast ever. So creates a computer program to find a murder that will make for the best thing. And then he goes and interviews the family about what happened. And there's been this horrible murder and this girl's been killed or whatever. And the mum's been telling the story. And then the host goes, oh, can you just read this? And he goes, yeah, sure. Wix websites helps you build and then Dexter Guff is Smarter Than You is kind of like a spoof Tony Robbins character. He's just launched his second season.
Tony Robbins, the mind guy.
The American go out and entrepreneurial
Like
kind of inspirational. Yeah. So Dexter Guff is that kind of thing, but it's imagine if Steve Coogan did an Alan Partridge version of Tony Robbins. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
And because it's all about making money, there's this bit where he goes, right, time for the ad break sponsor. So he has a sponsor for the ad break. Right? Yeah. And it's that thing of just sell everything. Yeah. And so just those little ideas that come in. And actually there is an element of that that's come up. But I think people are smart. People listening to this know what they're talking about. They know straight away when they kind of go, he's just pulled those figures out of his arse when he was talking about the listeners. And that's why I'm honest about it. I kind of go, I have seen the thing. I'm not a statistician. I can give you other figures, for example, that I know that are more accurate because I've read them more recently and I'm more across it. For example, again, you don't need to expose your figures here, but do you know the average number of listeners per podcast? Do you know what that number is?
127.
126. I'll give you that one. Yeah.
I'll listen to the feed.
Yeah, but that's Rob Walsh over at Listen. Now the thing with that is people, if you think about that, going,
the statistic is if you get more than 127 downloads per episode,
you're in the top 50%. You're in the top 50% of all
podcasts
podcasts
in the world.
Yeah,
Now
the caveat for that is here we go. So a lot of this is going off figures that come from Apple. So on Apple Podcasts, April this year, you had, I think it was around 706,000 podcasts were available, which is a lot, but still pales in comparison to the 5 million or 6.8 billion YouTube channels that there are.
True.
So 706,000 podcasts that are there registered now. However, out of all those,
how many are active?
Exactly, and how many are active recently? Now that doesn't work for everything because you have things like seasonal shows, like we mentioned it earlier, like Dexter Guff that I just mentioned or whatever.
Hardcore history.
Exactly.
Once every 5 months or something.
Right. But then if you look at the podcasts that, I'm trying to remember who did the research on this, really great article online. The podcasts that had been active in the last 3 months when they did the article, it was only around 140,000.
Right.
Which again is very interesting. So the fact that you're doing a show regularly, you're actually, those 100, you're an active show within that, but then you realize that those figures have been skewed at that 126 because you're looking at maybe 500,000 podcasts without an episode
active.
That counts as zero.
Yeah,
So that when you look at the statistics, it screws it. Now, anyway, put that all to one side. Even if you have 126 listeners, wherever that fits in the grander scale of the world, fuck that. Don't worry about that. Worry about you. And what I said right at the beginning, or near the beginning, value your listener. Value how important
every
they
single
are.
one of them.
Right. So, tell me about some of the gigs that you did. How many people did you play to when you were in your band?
In Europe, a lot.
Yeah?
Hundreds, thousands. Yeah.
100,000. When you go right back to the beginning when you were starting out. So
we've played to nobody.
You played to nobody. So so you've been doing this podcast 2 years.
Yeah.
When you first had a band, like when you got into that sort of 2 years down the road with a band, like what kind of crowds were you playing to at that point?
Probably 50 to 100.
Right. Now, you can get a really good atmosphere off that, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really exactly right. Now, that 50 to 100 is great. And that 50 to 100 is more than what the average wedding size is as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And those are people that feel obliged and really like you that have come to those weddings. And it's really difficult to get 50 to 100 people to come to a gig, especially when you're starting out.
These days.
Yeah. So if you start to think about that, and actually just go onto Google now, you can do that. Maybe if we can pop it up in the video, like just Google what like 100 people look like. Google what.
Yeah.
Google.
It's like what we were saying about if you've only had 100 listeners, but get them all in a room.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people.
It's amazing. And but the thing is, it's much better to do it this way because if you have 100 people turn up, you've got to feed them. You've got to organise a queue for the toilets.
Yeah.
Taxis home at the end of the night.
Yeah, I suppose they're there, but you don't have to deal with them.
Yeah, and so what I'm doing at the minute is I'm organising this conference, Pods Up North, 23rd November 2019 in Manchester, and that's 150 people that we want to have at that event. Tickets still available.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
And we have we're going to have somewhere between 20 and 30 speakers at the event. For that to happen, I'm going to have another 20 people there just facilitating it. Just people opening doors and making sure people find their way around things. People serving food and lunch, coffees and teas and things like that. Tech guys doing all that kind of stuff.
Even just for that small amount of people.
It's a lot of work. Whereas this, we could reach twice that many people.
Not have to do anything.
Exactly. Yeah, tech does it all. Yeah. So there's one advantage of doing a podcast that way.
This is one of the things I love about podcasting is I like being challenged. I like coming to people's different views on things that you wouldn't normally have had the chance to talk to someone about. Like without podcasting, we probably wouldn't have met.
And
we wouldn't have met.
There's a wonderful thing. Like podcasts are like the Masons at the minute, right? No, it really is. Right. So you if you don't know what the Masons are, what the Masons do, it's kind of like it was a secret society. It still is semi-secret, but generally,
no one people know who they are, but no one really knows what goes on.
I may have actually mentioned somebody in this episode who is a Mason, but that's all I could say. Or maybe I didn't. So the thing with that is they contribute, they help out. It's like a community. But if you know somebody is a Mason, you're supposed to help them, whatever's going on. Right. That's part of it. And there's a secret word the Masons have. And it used to be like, if you're ever in trouble, you would shout it out. And then anybody that heard it that was a Mason would immediately come to your aid.
Right.
Yeah. So that's secret word, which you can Google and find out quite easily. Joys of the modern internet.
Yeah.
Now, what I found with podcasts. So earlier this year, I went to Berlin. I was on my way to a stag do in Munich, and I thought, actually, there's a guy I met out in Philadelphia last year. Best name, Dr. Nicholas Berlin, who lives, and he lives in Berlin, right?
He changed his name.
Yeah, and Nico runs this thing called Besser FM, and what they do is they take big English language shows and they translate them into German.
Okay.
And he set up a whole business around that, and it's working really well. And interestingly, not only is it generating listeners in the German language, but it also boosts the English language downloads of the original show. Yeah. Anyway, so I'd set up a meeting with him, And then he had to change the meeting to the evening. And I was only in Berlin for the day. And so I arrived in Berlin at 9 a.m. And I had like, what am I going to do? I mean, I love Berlin as a city. And I was like, oh, okay, well, sorted out what I'm going to do this evening, where I'm going to meet him. But I've got like 6 hours to kill. So I went onto Twitter and to Meetup, found Berlin Podcasting, just sent a message out. Said, anybody fancy lunch? 15 minutes later, this guy called Albert messaged me back. He said, I'll DM you. And an hour later, I was on a tram about 20 minutes away, if that. Got off the tram. This huge German guy, Albert, 6'6", walks and talks. He does a couple of podcasts. Elixir of the Gods, which is about mezcal and other drinks. And also Berlin Briefing, which he does with his wife, which is amazing. So his wife's American. He's from Munich originally. He lives in Berlin. And what they do is they take local German stories that are in the local German media in German, translate it into English, and then create like a 7 or 8 minute podcast, which they write the night before. He goes and takes a shower in the morning. She records it. And then she gets in the shower while he edits it. And then they have breakfast and go to work while it uploads. Right? And they do that every single day.
Brilliant.
Anyway, so he met me and said like, I saw from your Twitter profile you're vegan. I know this great little Korean place. Takes me around the corner, buys my lunch.
Wow.
And we sit and just talk. And he works for a company that makes a lot of radio software and things like that, but he loves podcasting. And just looked after me and like spent an hour and a half together. And he was like, I'll be in Manchester in a few weeks. Give me a call.
What are the chances?
And then he came over. He came over for the Manchester Festival. His wife is a massive fan of New Order and the Manchester music scene from that time. And they came over. And so I found them, met them up, took them to some places that did mezcal, and was able to buy them lunches and return the favour. When I went to my first podcast movement, they accidentally gave me a twin room instead of a single room at the hotel. And so I randomly put out a little video kind of going, if anybody's here and stuck, give me it. Literally the next morning, somebody came up to me and said, were you joking when you said that thing? I was like, no. He said, this is Phil. And I have this amazing friend called Phil who's like an amazing singer, and he's a podcast recorder. And now because of just that, I let him stay for 2 nights in this room. Like if I ever need a favor, he's out in LA, so if I need something recording, he'll go and do it for me. But there is that wonderful thing, that wonderful community about podcasting, and that's kind of what I'm trying to bring together a little bit with Pods Up North. Yeah. And I'm not saying that you have to come to it and suddenly be like, give your life away, but like we've never met before, apart from a bit online. Yeah. And like we've certainly haven't met because he doesn't talk about you. You're like the brother he keeps locked in the basement.
That's where he likes it.
But there's an energy here. There's like we're into the same thing. There's an excitement about it. There's something great, and it's still really new. There's a Wild West frontier. And let's be completely honest, right? You've been doing this for 2 years.
3.
Right? 3 years now, right? I've been doing this even longer. Do you know what you're doing yet?
No, I'm still feel like I'm fumbling in the dark sometimes.
Yeah. I have no idea what I'm doing.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, no, completely. But what happens is, like, I'll come along and speak to people, and then I'll suddenly go, "Oh shit, yeah, okay, so I've done that." And one of my favorite quotes is Oscar Wilde, and it's "Experience is the name that wise men gave to their mistakes." Yeah. I've got shitloads of experience, right? And what that is, and that's where it's got to me now. So I'm in this position where me and Kate and Vic are putting this event together, which is going to be brilliant. And we've just reached out and we spoke to people and said, do you want to get involved? And everyone's just been like, yeah, why not? And the reason why some people aren't involved in this event has literally been because we forgot to call them. Right? It's literally been because everybody we've approached, unless they've been in Las Vegas like Mark Asquith and the Showbiz Lifestyle that he's leading, they come and they're there.
Chance.
Yeah, and it's been wonderful, and the support that we've got, and it's a community that we're all part of, but we don't realize it exists.
And it's only going to you're galvanizing it now. But think 2-3 years down the line.
So what the plan with it is it's going to start off as an event. It's really the most elaborate way to launch a podcast. So we're going to do a podcast with it, which I'll interview you on.
Yeah.
And the idea is we just get people in the north to be guest presenters and interview other podcasts that are happening, and either podcasts or people that are doing interesting things in that space, and just build that community. And I say the north, I mean Scotland, I mean Wales, I mean Ireland, I mean Newcastle, Preston, Birmingham, even Bristol, just outside of London.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And
it's a great idea.
It just grow it, and there's people there, and honestly, it's just about shining a spotlight on people. Like one of the greatest things I've ever heard is The Adventures of Brian Hovis, and Howell, who made that show. He's going to be one of our speakers on the day, and he does the box set pod. You might remember him from Rock FM if anybody's around Preston. Howell and Jamie, they used to do the show up there. He did the show. It's, how can I explain it? It's like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy done by Monty Python with the script for Indiana Jones. And the voice of it, it's one guy does every voice in it. So I think there's like 12 different male voices and 4 different female voices in the show.
Right.
And it's just this one guy that does it. And it was all recorded in a day.
Wow, bloody hell.
Yeah. It's only 7 episodes, but I strongly recommend you go and listen to it. It's got one of the best opening episodes ever. Really engaging, really gripping. There's one of the episodes is like only 5 minutes long, and I really like fucking around, breaking the fourth wall. We haven't even talked about the podcast I might get, but
get to
that. Breaking the fourth wall. They do this thing where the show just suddenly finishes, and up to that point the episodes have been like 10, 12 minutes long, and after 5 minutes the show finishes and the music comes on, and the music plays for a little bit, and then Brian just comes in and goes, "What? All right, so it's a bit shorter. Fuck off." You know, it's just like, it's my show kind of thing. It's that whole attitude around it. So that's just, I heard that and it's such a joy. And the thing that I learned very early on with podcasts is I go towards things that I wish I'd made.
I've seen a few where I've gone, I had that idea a while ago, but never bothered with it.
Yeah, two more that I recommend just off the top of my head. Everyone Else,
Right.
by Eva Krisiak. Oh my God. And I've got such...
Everyone Else.
And I've such a massive passion for this project. It's an interview podcast that she puts together. It's a photographic podcast. She stopped it now, I think. But you hardly ever hear her voice on it. And the experience of listening to it, especially if you're listening on a stereo or in a car, it's like what I imagine telepathy to be like.
Right.
Yeah, because it's like you're listening to someone's thoughts. And that's the best way I can explain it. And then my other favourite show at the minute, although the episodes seem to be a little more random, which I can forgive because they put so much into it, is The Offensive, which is like, if you imagine, in the thick of it, but done in a Premier League football boardroom.
Right.
Yeah. A great creative use of footballers' names as swear words.
Speaking of which, so on the left side,
Yeah.
I've got to talk about that,
Yeah.
which is an award-winning podcast.
Well, there's some debate about this because we won bronze at the ARIAs last year, which is the UK Audio and Radio Industry Awards, and Fight Disciples won the silver, and there was a Diary of a Marathon, a running podcast that won it. The 3 podcasts that were also nominated that didn't get an award were all BBC shows, including I say BBC shows. BBC 5 Live, the whole entire output of it was overlooked for us to get the bronze. Now, Jim that I do the show with says, well, we didn't win, right? So I think he had a competitive dad and got maybe too many 10th place rosettes at school, and that's where that comes from. But I'm like, no, get it while you can. Now, the interesting thing is even having that award and going down, and it was in Leeds when they did the award ceremony, and it was brilliant. It's brilliant to be there and have your name up on the big screen and read out, and it's such a great validation in some ways of it.
So what is the premise of the show?
The premise of the show. So how can I put this? If you imagine Charlie Brooker or John Oliver, if you know Last Week Tonight in America, doing football and doing 10 minutes on football, it follows the same route as a lot of political satire that you see,
Yeah.
but nobody does that for football. Nobody does a
No,
lot of
that's
football
true.
serious. And so our premise with the show is we just try to not do what they do on Match of the Day or anything else like that.
Yeah.
I'm
You're
assuming
almost like
you've listened
the
to it.
spoof of what's going on.
You say it's spoof. I mean, we've done some.
I'm doing a
some
disservice there, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, the one of the lessons that I learned. You know, I said to you earlier about have the reason for the show, have the why, and that filter for everything else. We were forced to come up with that really early on, or should I say, to refine it. So basically, we said we're going to do a show that's not about a specific team, which most football podcasts are, which was a mistake in some ways. If you want a big audience, go for a
Focus
big team.
on yeah.
So we're using football as a launch pad for some comedy, and we were like, we're just going to take the piss out of everything. That was the ethos. So Jim, that I do the show with, he's the voice of it. He's quite miserable and cynical. In real life, he's a little more humorous on the show. And initially, it would be because Jim, I've known him about 20 years. When we met, he was my producer. I was the presenter, and then we switched roles. So about 5 years ago, he was working at XFM. XFM was becoming Radio X. So he was put on gardening leave, wanted to do something creative, came up with this idea. He knew I was doing podcasting, had this idea, and so we mocked something up. I said, do me a demo and we'll make it. First thing he did on the demo was use Quincy Jones Self-Preservation Society. It was like, no. And 5 years on, I'm still having that conversation about music rights. So put this show together. And it was like, we're just going to take the piss out of everything. And then on like our fifth or sixth show, there was an international match happening in Paris between France and Germany, I think it was. And that very same night, you had the attacks at the Bataclan.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And we were like,
You can't make fun of that.
yeah, what do we do with this? Now, although there was an explosion and something happened outside the ground, technically nothing happened in the ground, and one of the footballers, one of their cousins were killed in the thing. And so we were like, well, what do we do? Well, because how do you square that circle? Because and we tried a few different ways of doing it, and in the end we just thought we're just going to ignore it.
Skip that,
Move on. But it didn't sit right with us. So after that, we kind of redefined what we were going to do and said we need to be clear on that. So rather than spending a lot of time and energy going, can we do this, can we not? We now go, what is it that we do, right? And so we've gone, we're gonna tackle things like people down the pub, the way that people will talk about things down the pub, but also like we're not going to do things like they do on Match of the Day. And so what we've done recently, we've ended up doing a lot of shows about racism, which is a hilarious subject.
I was just going to say about how are you going to tackle that shit that happened last night? Do you see that?
Yeah. So if you're just listening now, this was
Did you watch the football last night?
The England-Bulgaria game. It tells you when we're recording this, and there was all sorts of stuff going on. There was Nazi salutes and monkey chants and all this kind of stuff going on.
Did you not hear about this or not?
I don't watch football anymore.
Okay, yeah. And there was even one guy who'd gone to the trouble of doing a hilarious shirt to go, instead of respect, it just said no respect.
No respect. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been happening. How do you tackle that? We'll just go back and listen to the show and see how we've done that. One of the best episodes we've done recently, this last year really, was when you had the game where Raheem Sterling, City were playing at Chelsea. I think they lost that game, and as he went to get the ball for a corner, there was 3 men in the front row, and basically used very strong racist language against him. They defended it by saying, I actually said he's a mank cunt, not the other word, which somehow made it better. And I was like, obviously, all right, you've made it more regional than racist. But also that didn't make sense because Raheem Sterling was actually brought up in London and he's from Jamaica. But, you know, that's by the by. But so we focused on this weird thing where so you've kind of justified by saying that you focused on the mank bit, and I'm sorry if anybody was offended by that, but that's how they defended what they said.
What?
And we focused on this is just somebody that's doing their job, and yet where does that happen? So then we do a sketch then about somebody like, just working at Tesco's, and just like bagging vegetables, and people don't go and bag that faster, you bitch, whatever. Yeah, it just doesn't happen yet. For some reason, it's acceptable in football.
Yeah,
and because we've got this comedy element to the show, when we stop and we ask these questions, it kind of makes it a bit more powerful in some ways.
They're quite short episodes, aren't they? What you do?
Yeah, but it takes a fucking long time to make them.
I could tell. It's like to execute it. It's quite a lot short first time, but the preparation.
My two favourite things in life are when somebody goes, "I don't like football, but I really like your show."
Yeah,
and secondly is when like, that must take you fucking ages to make. I went, thank God. Yeah, so because we kind of create a soundscape that goes with it. There's a lot that goes on. So generally, what happens is, go and check the show out. Have a listen to it. It's On the Left Side, the funny football show. And
I'm a subscriber.
We have. So myself and Jim, we use Slack a lot. I don't know if you ever used that
program. I know of it. I've not used it.
So Slack's like a workspace solution where you can upload pictures. It's just easier to follow things than it is to use email. And then we use Google Docs for the script. And so what we'll do is, whenever we come across something that we think's a suitable story for the show, we'll pull that up. And we'll drop that in, and we won't just drop it in, but we'll maybe put an angle and we'll put a story with it. So, for example, last night I came back, and after the football, I was driving home, and somebody phoned in to one of the radio stations who'd been at the game, and was basically saying, "Oh, it's really racist. It was really horrible," right? But then was talking about the Bulgarians in a really racist way afterwards. And so there's like, we couldn't quite find the angle, but I thought there's maybe something here. So I captured that bit of audio to maybe do something with it. In the end, we haven't done it. And we've had to, because stuff develops all the time, we're doing a topical show. Again, that's something, like two things I'll say about On the Left Side is, two lessons I've learned from that is, it's a fucking shit name. And right, because people hear it and go, is it a political show? Actually, weirdly enough,
that's why you've put the tag on it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's become a political show because of it was
What's
just seemed to be
going on.
talking about racism and all that. And the second thing that we've learned from it is, like, if you do a topical show, like, your shelf life is really short.
It's not evergreen content, is it?
Yeah, which is why we kind of change what we do, because actually I think a lot of what we do is evergreen when you go back and listen to it.
Yeah,
even because because we're not focused on
paper.
The scores.
If you read the description, that's kind of dating.
So we're not talking about. We don't say, "Oh, they won 4-0." We'll mention those results sometimes, but that's not what the show's about.
Yeah, because last night England won 6-0, but no one's even. That's like a side issue, isn't
it? So and so that's, we've had to rewrite a little bit, and that's come on to the end of the show now. So the script's been finished today. I've sent it out to a few people to voice some bits. Jim will record the vocals tomorrow morning, and then I'll edit it, and it will take me quite a long time to put all that together. So I've not even counted it, but I could show you a screenshot of my average session when I'm putting that together, and I'll have like 12 different tracks and maybe 150 edits.
So it take you into the hours to get it.
Oh yeah, completely.
For how many minutes usually of?
We average about 10 minutes of the show, and so.
Well, that brings on to the other question: is there an ideal length of a podcast?
Somebody said that as long as it needs to be short enough to keep you interested, but as long as it needs to be to cover the essentials, which could be applied to items of clothing as well. I mean, the thing is, people will have switched off by now. It's just the way it goes.
Yeah, of course.
People will have switched off. But the fact is, it's like, fuck them. You know, if you're listening to this bit now, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
You're engaged.
Yeah.
You're on the same page as me and Mark are, because you're interested. How often have you done that thing where you're kind of going, oh, I wish they asked them this?
Yeah,
well, there's
exactly.
There's the opportunity now for this to come out. And at some point, we're going to go, right, tech's run out of hard drive space, right? We're going to have to call it quits. Or we're going to go, I really need the bathroom, or you need a drink or something like that. And that'll be a natural. Or we'll just kind of go, you know what? We'll just do this another time and pick it up.
Yeah.
That's it. There is no ideal length.
No.
When we tried to come up with that, and we kind of ordered it, think about who your audience is. Think about who you want to listen to the show, and then let that dictate the length. Think about what you want to say. And also, if it's too long, then maybe split it up and do it across a couple of episodes to do those things. And
but we've kind of started from day one. We've always been quite long.
Yeah.
So since have been with us since the beginning, just got used to that. That's part of the show. Sometimes it can be an hour and a half. Sometimes it can be 3 hours and 20 minutes. It just depends on the guest, depends on the conversation. Sometimes the guest hasn't got much time.
Is there a price?
A prize?
Yeah, I'm very competitive.
Oh, for the
The
longest show.
ever show.
Where's the I think it's just over 3 hours, was it? About 3 hours?
Yeah, I think so.
How are we doing?
When you add all the bits on.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Maybe
I don't
just
know,
over
what
3
are we on
hours.
now?
I don't know, 2.5.
2.5. Well done you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
We're doing well. No, but yeah, I agree. I don't think there is.
It's but again, it's a question. So here's a really interesting thing, which people may know, they may not know, but it blew my mind when I found this out. So the average pop song is 3 minutes long.
Yep.
Why?
Because that's, well, what I've understood is that's people's average attention span.
And so how did they know that before they made the first pop song?
I don't know. Some way of realising how people switch off or turn over or disengage from the song.
Maybe. So one of the biggest influences on this was finance. And so what happened was in the 50s in America, you had jukeboxes, and that attracted a young crowd, and they would come and they wouldn't spend any money in they'd maybe buy a Coke, and they'd put their money in the jukebox. And what happened was the owners of the diners wrote and complained because the songs were too long. Right? Because they were like, there's all these songs that were 6-7 minutes long and that kind of thing. And it's like they could only get 10 an hour. So they asked for the songs to be shorter, and they could double their income that they made, because the kids would sit in for hours but not buy any food because they didn't. They had quotas. So they made money. And then that built the trend, and people became used to that, and then that moved out.
Wow. Look at the oracle over here.
I mean, some bloke told me that in a pub, but
it sounds about right.
Yeah,
yeah, but like commercial radio is all about algorithms and everything now, isn't it?
it is. I mean, the thing is, there's some clever little things that go on. So I don't know if you remember Galaxy Radio, Galaxy FM.
I don't think so. No.
So it wasn't everywhere, but I think you had it in Leeds and Manchester. It might have been in Newcastle as well. And one of the things they had was they were a commercial radio station. So every hour they would play 12 or 13 minutes worth of adverts. Because that's how they were able to fund themselves. But they came up with this thing of going, we play more songs per hour than any other commercial station. And they were getting out 15 or 16 songs per hour. And there was two things that they were doing. They were massively slashing them down and doing like massive
Talking
radio
over,
edits, right?
Yeah,
But also they sped all their songs up by 5%. All their songs are sped, so they got an extra song in, right?
Wow.
And so they did that. And it used to be that you could tell what radio station you were listening to just by popping through the channels through what song was on. Now you'll get the same artist will be played on every station. Yeah,
it's pretty.
And that's another thing that's moved to. And I wonder if as well this has been a reason why. I'm suggesting some kind of evil political cabal here, but like. Where does radio fit in? As soon as they figure out how to have music in podcasts in a simple way.
I've noticed a lot of radio stations having more conversation though. Less talk. Less music, more talk.
I think so. The way I see it, I think radio won't die out. I come through, but I think it will occupy a different space. I'll maybe strengthen place that it occupies now. Now, you although having said that, so my argument always used to be, I think when it comes to like big events and live events, radio will be king. But actually,
now you've got live streaming.
Exactly, that changes it. So what does that mean?
If every event does its own live streaming, radio doesn't need to be there.
So, but what radio can still do is the curation side of things, tell you what you should listen to, and that's what we were missing in podcasting at the minute.
Yeah, it's true.
Until somebody comes on like myself and says, "Go and check this song out. Go and listen to that." These two guys in a Ford Mondeo talking about this case in 1982. But then that's just my opinion. But to be fair, that's all that John Peel did, and that worked.
That's true. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, because we're all how podcasting's still relatively new. It's probably the newest medium of them all in terms of broadcasting.
It depends. Oh, you could say TikTok's the newest one. Yeah, but then it's just a variation on a theme. But then arguably, podcasting is a variation on a theme.
Yeah, well, it's still in its infancy. I think podcasting.
I think the amazing thing with a podcast is that there's a guy in America called John Lee Dumas who runs a show called Entrepreneur on Fire, and I've met John a couple of times from going over to America, and I've quite a cool party trick which he loves, so I always do that for him. If you ever meet me, you'll see it, and it's super impressive. And then the next time you meet me, you'll be bored straight away. And I spoke to him because he used to do a lot of webinars about like how to start your podcast and do that, and I watched him and learned a lot about him. And what John Lee Dumas has done, he hit it at the right time. He hit what he was doing at the right time, did a thing, and what he kind of does now, as well as doing his show, he also has like a sign up, a society that you join, which is a community that's paid in, which is basically like he's selling you the secrets of his success. Now, a lot of that is practical stuff that works, but some of that is, I believe, just worked for him at that time, and it may work for you, it may not, but that's what he does, and he has an incredible lifestyle. He's probably one of the highest earners in the world at the minute in terms of podcasting, and his followers, the people that are part of his community, they just go crazy for him. They go crazy for him, and so I met him. Sounds very cool. A roof party in Anaheim in America when I went to my first podcast movement, and I got chatting to him, and I said, how do you handle it? I said, because like there are people here that treat you like you're the Messiah. And he was like, you know what? It is really cool. It is really cool, and people are really nice and really grateful. I'm really thankful for like the lifestyle that I've got. A lot of it is down to them and what's happened. He says, but the great thing is I leave this building tonight, walk on the street, nobody knows who I am. Yeah. Nobody knows who I am. So within this bubble, he is like the hot ticket, but he steps out. Now, that's a very interesting difference to the likes of, say, the Kardashians or the Beckhams.
They can't go anywhere.
They can't. Yeah, exactly. But this guy potentially.
So it's in a certain bubble.
Yeah.
He's the king. He comes out, nobody.
Exactly.
Which is probably the best of both worlds, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I mean, imagine not be able to go anywhere.
Not being able
without being hounded.
Not being able to come to Penrith and do the show.
Yeah. Well, it's been amazing talking to you, man.
Thanks,
I'm so glad we've actually met face to face.
I'm so glad this was the end. Not that I was bored, but I was just thinking, how
no.
long are we going to be?
No, I'm so glad. We'll do it again sometime for definite.
Yeah.
When you do the next year's show,
we'll turn it around, and I'll do you as well for one of my shows.
Yep, definitely. Where can people find you?
Oh God! So just little tip: whenever you're setting up, just try and have the same brand across all your platforms. So at Ant McGinley on Instagram, on Twitter, find me there. I linked to everything else. I've decided, actually, I've just literally in conversation earlier today with somebody. I'm going to rebrand myself as the UK's podcast ambassador. Now that isn't a position that exists yet, but after Brexit happens, like nobody will know what's going on. So I just slip myself in there, and so that'll be me, and you'll see me looking smiling, having a big ginger beard.
You need like a website or a hub where all you.
Yeah. So well at the minute Pods Up North, so all the focus and attention is on that, and then I'll bring you. So I say Pods Up North. If you're listening to this before November 23rd, 2019, come and join us in Manchester. It's going to be brilliant. What I'll do is I'll give the guys a code as well, so you can get the early bird rate for the tickets. If you want to come down, if you guys want to come down, it'd be great to see you there as well.
Sweet.
And yeah, just give a shout out to. Let's see, have I shouted out all the podcasts that I've done? All the ones I like, anyway. But yeah, just the thing is, I would say as well, like it's still a new medium, and so. Like what happens is that there's a lot of stuff. Like I found one today on the way up here, so I'd listened to an episode of I'd listened to the episode you did a couple of weeks ago with the Lancashire Hot Boss.
Yep.
And then I got to T-Bay, and I stopped and I had there was a bite to eat, and I thought, right, I'll listen to something a little bit different now. And somebody just followed me, which happens a lot of different podcasts, and it looked really cool. Really liked the idea of the show, what they were saying, brilliant. Put it on. And it was so bad. It was, and the thing is, it's like I'm not going to name it because I don't believe in that. But what's great is they've started it, they're doing it, they're putting it out there, and that's the way you've got to do it. But I know for a fact is what they'll do is they'll get people to listen to their show that have never listened to podcasts before, and what that will do is it will put people off podcasts.
Yeah.
So my my kind of appeal at the minute, my mission is to say to people, don't plug your own podcast, plug somebody else's. And I hope I've done that today. I've mentioned quite a few different ones that are out there. Yeah. Some that I am involved with. There's a lot that I'm not involved with at all that I kind of wish that I had some. I mean, the one show that really inspired me to go all into podcasting is Radiolab.
There you go.
And that's all about curiosity. And last year, I got to go to WNYC in America, New York, and walk around there. It's just a fucking office, but I was like a kid in a candy shop.
Cool, though.
Yeah, like Jad wasn't there. Rob wasn't there, but like I was in the place where they don't even record it there, right? Sometimes they do, but like oh, here's a guy who made some music. Well, that's he's not here, but that's the guitar he made some music on in that last episode. And I was like, can I take a picture? But
the thing about Pods Up North, which some people might not realize, it's not just about all the sessions that you have on it. It's like the people that you meet while you're there, all the networking that you do, other podcasters, people will be in the same position then, like thinking about starting a podcast. They might meet their next podcast partner there.
Yeah, or somebody that you can do something with. Also, there's going to be, we're still finalizing everything for this, but there's going to be people there that are doing things that you didn't know about. There's going to be sessions about promoting the social media, those little things that you don't even think about. Like I just did an Instagram course. My God, I thought I understood
Instagram course.
I know, I'm so millennial. But they're like hashtag, and I was like, really? Is it really that simple? And I doubled my interaction with Instagram.
What were the big takeaways from that then? Because I like Instagram.
£500 for this. All right, so the trick with Instagram is one trick with Instagram is make sure you use your hashtags.
Of course.
Right? But what the mistake people make is they use all the biggest ones. So they'll look and they'll see who's following this. And if all your hashtags are the really big ones, what actually happens is
you just get lost.
Exactly. You get completely lost because
I thought it was the key was to make this hashtag specific to what you're doing, but also, like, say you're doing podcasting, a podcast about podcasting, tag your guest, tag your show, tag other big things around podcasting as well.
Yeah, but also try and own a hashtag as well.
Create new ones. Yeah. So what I do for this show is every episode I'll do, like this one will be BTN50, hashtag BTN60.
Right.
Behind the 960.
Wow.
So every time
which is almost my age as well.
Every time we post about it on Twitter and on Facebook, it's got the hashtag.
Yeah.
So if anyone picks it up and shares it, should do the same.
And hopefully there's not some kind of like questionable organisation that springs up with the hashtag BTN as well.
You never know.
It gets you in trouble. Thanks for having me in. It's
no
been
worries,
great.
Man.
And also as well, I just have to say, like, I love the fact that you go to the effort of doing this and you set it up and you actually have a live scenario where people can come in and chat. And it's like I almost feel like you should do a behind the noise.
Well, we might do that.
Yeah, and just like open up the curtains and see what's happening.
Well, there was a bit of a decision because I could just do them on Skype like a lot of people do, but we did a few of them in the beginning and they just weren't the same. Like because we're doing both types. There was no comparison, and the downloads reflected that. It was like less than half every time I did one on Skype. The quality weren't there. You get a bit of a delay. You're not in the same room as them, so it vastly affected the conversation.
So there's a guy.
So I just made a decision to I'm just doing this. People are going to have to come to me or not. If it works, it works.
There's a guy I met last year who's a mighty beard, Jason Juliet, who has this podcast, the Jason Juliet podcast, and he set up his own media company, Jason Juliet. And his whole thing is he'll do all his podcasts in person, but he just uses that to drive across America.
So he goes to them.
He goes to them.
Right, well, that's the other option. Yeah.
And then there's a guy, I'm just trying to find his podcast now, give him a shout out. The Backstage Van. All right. So basically this guy is kitting out his van, and he's gonna live in it, sleep in it, record in it. And basically his plan is to drive around. I mean, it's really fucking cool. Johnny Leftwich is his name. It's not gone live yet. He's a photographer. He used to work in special effects.
So he's going to do a podcast.
So he's launching this podcast based on the van.
Right.
He's going to drive across America, right, for about 2 years.
Wow.
And just basically go and find bands. And the van's big enough that he can record them doing a session in the van because it's an American van.
That's
it'd be quite cozy. And then so we record them playing and interview them in the van. Then they'll go. He'll maybe go to a gig with them, whatever. Then he'll come back. Then he'll sleep in the van, right? And then he'll drive on to the next place.
What's it called?
Well, the backstage van is the. If you want to follow him
Making note of
on Twitter at the backstage van, that's Johnny. But
Brilliant.
it's not launched yet.
No,
But like
I'll keep an eye on that.
he's at Podcast Movement, and if you want to find him, his Twitter is at Johnny_Leftwich. That's JOHNN. And the picture he's got on his profile is an amazing like horror makeup. That's not the makeup he did. He's actually in that costume that you see.
Right.
So yeah.
And
but
McGinley, you are a formidable podcasting force.
I'll be a formidable one as well. But,
Thanks again for joining us, man. It's
no,
been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me here, and here's to the next 60.
Yeah. Cheers.